Hey friends, settle in, get comfortable, because tonight we're stepping quietly into the Tower of London in the year 1483, long before souvenir shops, electric lights, polished signs, and cheerful guides make these ancient walls feel quite so welcoming for you. The tower is not an attraction, it is your workplace. And unfortunately, your shift begins before sunrise. Outside, London is still mostly swallowed by darkness. The Thames slides past the fortress like a broad strip of black silk, carrying the occasional creak of a boat or distant splash against timber pilings. Somewhere beyond the walls, a dog barks, a church bell sounds through the damp air, its note drifting across rooftops before fading into silence. Inside the tower, you're waking on something considerably less comfortable than your modern mattress. Your blanket smells faintly of smoke, wool, and several nights of human occupation. The air has that particular medieval combination of damp stone, stale rushes, old leather, sweat, and wood smoke. Nobody has invented the scented candle that claims to smell like English castle morning, and perhaps that is for the best. You pull yourself upright. The stone around you holds the night's cold remarkably well, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and while you settle beneath your blankets. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Perhaps it is midnight in Toronto, 2 in the morning in London, or a quiet evening somewhere in Australia while you prepare to drift away. Now, dim the lights and return to that cold chamber, because your feet have just touched the floor. There is no gentle alarm melody, no coffee machine waits downstairs. Your morning begins because someone else is already moving nearby, boots scraping against the floor while a sleepy voice mutters something you cannot quite understand. You dress by weak light. Your clothing is practical rather than glamorous. Linen lies closest to the skin, with wool above it for warmth. You pull on hose and sturdy footwear suited to stone floors, mud, stairs, and hours of standing. Clothing in the 15th century can communicate status very clearly, and anyone looking at you knows immediately that you're not one of the great nobles sleeping in better quarters elsewhere. That is one useful certainty in 1483. People generally know where you stand, quite literally, in your case, beside a doorway. You emerge into the early air and immediately feel the difference between enclosed chamber and open courtyard. Moisture hangs everywhere. London sits in a landscape shaped by river, marshy ground, smoke, and unpredictable English weather. And the tower's stone surfaces gather dampness enthusiastically. Your breath briefly appears before you. Above you rises the White Tower, already more than 4 centuries old in your lifetime. William the Conqueror began constructing this enormous stone stronghold after the Norman conquest, and by 1483 it has long dominated London's eastern edge as a symbol of royal power. That is one of the more straightforward facts about your surroundings. The tower is not originally built simply as a prison, despite what later popular imagination might suggest. It is a fortress, royal residence, administrative centre, arsenal, treasury, and secure complex whose functions change repeatedly over the centuries. To you, however, it is mostly a maze of responsibilities. A sleepy colleague passes you. You exchange a few words. Nobody delivers an inspiring speech about defending England. He probably wants breakfast, so do you, but duty comes first. The fortress begins waking gradually rather than suddenly. Servants move through passages. Someone carries fuel. Somewhere metal touches metal with a sharp little ring. Horses shift and snort. A door groans open. Keys clatter against one another, a sound you will hear constantly because control of movement is one of the tower's fundamental concerns. Who enters? Who leaves? Who has permission? Who absolutely does not? These questions sound mundane until you remember that this is 1483. King Edward IV has died only recently. His young son Edward has inherited the crown as Edward V, but England is entering one of the most politically uncertain summers of the 15th century. Powerful men are manoeuvring around a boy king, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the king's uncle, is rapidly becoming the central figure in the struggle over royal authority. You do not wake knowing how historians will describe these events. There is no dramatic music warning you that something significant is coming. History feels different when you're inside it. Mostly, it feels like work. You make your way toward your assigned duty, passing walls that have absorbed generations of footsteps. Your hand occasionally brushes cold stone underfoot. Surfaces change from worn flooring to uneven paving. Light enters slowly through openings above, turning darkness into a grey morning. There may already be rumours moving through the garrison. Rumours travel beautifully in enclosed communities. A servant hears something from a clerk hears something from a messenger. A soldier hears half of it while drinking. By the time it reaches you, 3 noblemen have supposedly been arrested. London is about to riot. France is invading. And someone's aunt has personally spoken to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Medieval misinformation requires no internet connection. One curious detail about the tower is that animals have already been kept within the royal complex for generations. England's kings maintain a royal menagerie here, with exotic creatures received as diplomatic gifts. Lions are particularly associated with it. Although the exact arrangement and number of animals vary over time, so yes, somewhere within this formidable royal fortress. Your working environment can occasionally include noises from creatures that most Londoners will never see alive. Imagine explaining that to the new recruit. Watch the gate, obey your superior, and don't annoy the lion. Perfectly normal employment. Yet much about daily guard service remains frustratingly difficult for modern historians to reconstruct in minute detail. Records tell us about offices, payments, appointments, military organisation, royal households, and the tower's broader functions. But they rarely preserve an ordinary century's complete timetable. Researchers continue to disagree over how standardised the daily routines of lower-ranking guards would have been during moments of political crisis, especially when temporary troops, household retainers, and permanent officials could overlap. Your imagined day therefore has to remain carefully grounded in what the period makes plausible, without pretending that someone conveniently left behind your personal schedule. You reach your position. Perhaps you're relieved to find the previous watch awake. Being caught asleep on guard duty is not the sort of professional review you want. The man you replace looks tired. His shoulders sag slightly. He tells you what has happened during the night. Very little. That is good. Guarding a fortress is one of those occupations where an uneventful shift should technically be considered a tremendous success. Even though it feels exactly like boredom, you take your place. Morning continues gathering around the tower across the Thames. Shapes become clearer. Boats begin moving with greater frequency. Watermen call across the river. Oars dip rhythmically into dark water. London is waking beyond the fortress, and soon the city will become noisy with traders, animals, bells, carts, craftsmen, servants, beggars, officials, and thousands of people pursuing the complicated business of staying alive. You stand between that city and one of the kingdom's most important royal strongholds. The responsibility sounds impressive. The physical reality involves cold fingers. You flex them. You shift your weight. Stone is not forgiving to anyone expected to remain standing for long periods. The smell of cooking eventually reaches you from somewhere behind the walls. which feels unnecessarily cruel when you're still at your post. Smoke curls upward into the pale sky. Voices multiply. Doors open and close. And beneath all these ordinary sounds sits something harder to identify. Tension. You cannot know what the coming weeks will bring. You cannot know that the boy whose crown seems secure will never receive his coronation. You cannot know that Richard will soon become king. You cannot know that centuries later people will still argue passionately about what happened inside these walls. Historians still argue whether Richard III was directly responsible for the disappearance of the princes, whether another powerful figure could have acted, or whether the surviving evidence allows any final certainty at all. But those questions belong further along your watch, for now. Nobody has vanished, for now. The gates still need guarding. The morning light touches the upper stonework, gradually turning grey surfaces warmer. Birds circle above the battlements. The Thames continues flowing past as it has through. The reigns of kings who once seemed permanent. You straighten as footsteps approach. Your first real duty of the morning is beginning. Someone wants to enter the tower, and before you can decide whether that person belongs inside, you must understand something more basic. Who exactly are you? This ordinary man holding royal responsibility in your tired hands, and how did you end up standing here in the first place? The approaching footsteps give you a moment to consider the curious chain of circumstances that has placed you here, standing inside one of England's most important fortresses with cold hands, tired eyes, and responsibilities that sound considerably grander when someone else describes them. You're not necessarily a professional soldier in the modern sense. There is no standardized national army waiting in permanent barracks across England. Military service in the late 15th century is built from overlapping systems of royal officers, household retainers, noble affinities, local obligations, hired soldiers, and men summoned for particular campaigns or emergencies. Your own route into service could therefore have taken several forms. Perhaps you belong to the household of a royal officer. Perhaps a local connection recommends you. Perhaps you have previous military experience and discover that guarding royal property offers more predictable employment than waiting for another campaign. Connections matter enormously. Medieval England runs on relationships. Someone knows someone who can place your name before the right official, which means that, in one respect at least. The 15th century employment market may feel suspiciously familiar. Your family probably does not belong among the poorest labourers. Military equipment costs money, useful connections have value, and trustworthy service around royal property requires a degree of reputation. Yet you are certainly not drifting through the tower as a great lord. When important nobles pass, you recognise the difference instantly in clothing, companions, confidence, and the simple amount of space everyone else allows them. You live somewhere in the enormous middle landscape between destitution and magnificence, and you work constantly. One well-established feature of late medieval England is the importance of household retainers and personal loyalty among powerful nobles. Great men surround themselves with servants, administrators, armed followers, and dependents whose fortunes can become closely tied to those of their patron. This arrangement provides employment and protection. It also creates a slight problem when the political weather changes. If your patron prospers, wonderful. If your patron is accused of treason, things become considerably less relaxing, so you learn discretion. You listen more than you speak. You discover that a guard who loudly announces his opinions about every noble family in England may enjoy a remarkably short career. Your immediate loyalty is expressed through service. You obey orders transmitted through officers above you. The tower itself falls under the authority of important royal officials, most notably the constable of the tower and his lieutenant. Though the exact composition of the men performing security duties can change according to circumstances, The famous yeoman warders known to later generations should not simply be projected backward onto you in their familiar Tudor form. The institution develops over time, and the brightly recognizable image tourists associate with tower guards belongs to a later historical world. No magnificent ceremonial uniform waits for you. No postcard photographer either. Your clothing is functional. Your equipment tells people more clearly what you're doing. Depending upon your assignment and status, you might carry or have access to weapons such as a sword, dagger, bill, bow, or other polearm. The English military reputation of your century remains strongly connected with the longbow, whose effectiveness has already been demonstrated repeatedly during the wars in France. But owning a weapon does not automatically make you a heroic warrior. Most of your day involves not using it. That is preferable. A bill or polearm is particularly useful for a guard because it offers reach and authority without requiring you to wander around permanently prepared for a tournament. A sword may hang at your side, but swords vary considerably in quality and cost. Your equipment reflects your means, position, and function. Then there is armor. You probably do not spend every quiet hour sealed from head to toe in the elaborate plate harness associated with wealthy knights. That would be expensive, exhausting, and unnecessary. Protection appropriate to your duty might include a helmet and defensive garments or pieces of armor, depending on the circumstances. Better equipped men can possess more substantial protection. What you actually wear changes with assignment, threat level, availability, and status. This is where modern reconstruction becomes delicate. Scholars have long debated how consistently ordinary fortress guards were equipped from day to day, particularly because surviving records often describe stores, purchases, or military preparations more readily than the exact outfit worn by one unnamed sentry on one ordinary morning. So you should resist imagining every man around you dressed identically. The tower is not staffed by medieval action figures fresh from matching boxes. You look different from one another. One man has better boots. Another owns a better blade. Someone has repaired the same piece of clothing so many times that the repairs appear to have developed their own repairs. And somebody, inevitably, smells worse than everyone else. Your wages matter because they determine much of this life. Late medieval military payments vary greatly according to rank, duty, contract, and period. Skilled fighting men and officers command more than ordinary soldiers. Payment can also be delayed, complicated, or tied to particular service. Money arrives in silver coin. When it does arrive, you notice. You need food, clothing, footwear, drink, repairs, lodging, and perhaps support for relatives beyond the fortress. A few coins can disappear with impressive speed. There is also the question of whether you have a wife and children. You might. Your service does not require you to exist as an unattached character waiting inside the tower whenever history needs a witness. Men performing military and administrative duties have families, obligations, friendships, debts, arguments, and ordinary concerns. Perhaps your wife lives elsewhere in London. Perhaps your parents remain in another county. Perhaps you send part of your earnings home. Maybe your greatest concern this morning is not Richard of Gloucester or the succession at all. Maybe your child needs shoes. History books naturally focus on crowns because crowns generate documents, wars, treaties, and magnificent portraits. Shoes rarely receive chapters, yet shoes matter enormously when you are the person buying them. A peculiar detail of your world is that England has already spent generations encouraging archery practice. Laws and proclamations at various times attempted to ensure that able men practiced with bows, particularly on Sundays and feast days when other amusements could compete for attention. Imagine your government reminding you that recreational archery is essentially a matter of national security. Your weekend hobby comes with strategic expectations. As a guard, competence matters beyond fighting. You must recognize authority. You must remember instructions. You must know which doors remain secured, which people can pass, and which messages require attention. You need enough discipline to remain alert when absolutely nothing interesting has happened for hours. That final skill is harder than it sounds. Danger produces attention naturally. Boredom does not. Stand beside a wall for 3 hours while listening to rain, and you discover how creative the human mind becomes. You count passing boats. You examine cracks in stone. You wonder what is being cooked. You think about ale. You decide that you will stop thinking about ale. Then you think about ale again. Your social standing gives you another useful talent. You learn how to behave around rank. A nobleman does not need to announce that he is important. His clothing, attendants, horse, weapons, and manner announce it for him. Sumptuary expectations and the broader culture of dress reinforce visible distinctions between social groups. You lower your gaze when appropriate. You speak respectfully. You do not become conversational merely because an earl happens to be standing nearby. The idea that everyone in medieval England obediently accepts these hierarchies without complaint would be too simple. Of course, people quarrel about wages, privileges, obligations, local rights, taxation, and authority constantly, but hierarchy structures your environment. At the Tower, hierarchy can also keep you alive. If an officer gives an order, you follow it unless another recognized authority overrides him. That sounds simple until rival commands begin arriving. And 1483 is rapidly becoming a year in which rival commands may matter. For now, though, your identity rests on smaller certainties. You're a working man attached to royal security. Your usefulness depends less upon dramatic swordsmanship than reliability. Someone has decided you can be trusted with weapons, keys, access, information, or some combination of them. That trust has value. It also has consequences. The footsteps you heard earlier finally reach you. A familiar figure appears, exchanges the appropriate words, and passes without incident. You watch him disappear farther into the complex. Simple enough, but your eyes follow him because that is what you are paid to do. You adjust your clothing against the morning chill and glance along the wall. You know your own place now. What you do not yet fully know is the enormous place around you. Because guarding the tower requires more than standing beneath a convenient archway. You must learn its gates, courtyards, walls, chambers, towers, river approaches, stairways, storehouses, and passages until the fortress becomes a map carried silently inside your head. And your feet are about to learn every unpleasant stone of it. Your feet begin that education almost immediately. Once another man takes the stationary position, you move away from the entrance and follow a familiar route through the fortress. The Tower of London reveals itself differently when you work here. From outside, it appears solid and imposing, a great concentration of pale stone rising beside the Thames. From inside, it becomes a complicated collection of walls, buildings, staircases, courtyards, doors, workshops, chambers, and corners where visibility disappears at precisely the moment you would prefer it not to. You learn the place through repetition. Turn here, climb there, check this door, look through that opening, listen before entering the next passage. The White Tower remains the great physical anchor around which much of the complex has developed. Begun under William the Conqueror in the late 11th century, it was designed to project Norman authority over London as much as to provide practical defence. More than 400 years later, it still dominates your surroundings. You tilt your head upward as you pass. Its walls are massive. Small openings interrupt the stone. The building feels less like something constructed by ordinary hands and more like a piece of landscape that has somehow decided to become rectangular. Yet the fortress of 1483 is far larger and more complicated than this original Norman keep. Successive kings have expanded it. Henry III and Edward I especially transformed the tower during the 13th century by creating additional defensive walls, towers, gates, and a moat by your lifetime. Concentric defences surround the inner stronghold, producing layers that an attacker would have to penetrate. That is a reassuring thought when you're inside, less reassuring if someone asks you to clean or patrol all of it. You continue along the inner ward. Your boots make small hard sounds against stone. In sheltered places you catch the smell of smoke, damp timber, animals, food, and human occupation. Medieval fortresses are not sterile monuments. People live here. They cook, sleep, work, argue, carry supplies, maintain weapons, empty waste, tend animals, deliver messages, and complain about weather. The tower breathes like a small fortified neighbourhood. That is easy to forget when looking at it centuries later. You pass structures associated with royal accommodation. Kings have used the tower as a residence, particularly before coronations or during moments when secure lodging close to London matters. Royal apartments have changed over generations, with halls, chambers, chapels, kitchens, and service spaces supporting court life. A palace inside a fortress sounds luxurious. It can be. But luxury in 1483 still includes smoke, draughts, insects, chamber pots, flickering light, and the constant logistical problem of feeding large numbers of people. Royalty improves the cushions. It does not abolish the 15th century. You keep moving. A staircase takes you upward, each step worn slightly by generations of feet. The higher you climb, the more the river begins to reveal itself beyond the walls. The Thames is not scenery. It is infrastructure. London depends heavily upon the river for transport, commerce, communication, and food. Moving heavy goods by boat is often easier than dragging them through narrow streets. The tower's position beside the Thames therefore gives it extraordinary strategic importance. From your elevated position, you can watch vessels approaching. Small boats cross between banks. Barges carry cargo. Watermen maneuver passengers through traffic. Voices travel strangely across the surface, sometimes sounding closer than the speakers actually are. And then there is the river entrance. Later generations will know one entrance as Traitor's Gate, a name dripping with theatrical menace in your own century. The Watergate is simply part of the practical architecture connecting the fortress with the Thames. Although prisoners and important arrivals can indeed enter by water, the famous name itself becomes more firmly associated with later traditions. You probably do not stand dramatically beside it whispering, "Traitor's Gate," every time somebody arrives. That would become exhausting. You descend again. Another gate requires attention. The tower's defensive design means that movement can be controlled in stages. Gates, drawbridges, walls, and guarded passages prevent a visitor from simply wandering directly from London into the most sensitive areas. This layered security suits your job perfectly. It also means keys. Many keys. Heavy iron keys become symbols of authority because doors matter. A locked chamber can contain weapons, documents, treasure, supplies, or a prisoner. Whoever controls access controls more than a piece of wood and iron. There is an oddly satisfying physical certainty in turning a medieval lock. Metal enters metal. The mechanism resists. You apply pressure. Then comes the clunk. Secure. Of course, locks are only as useful as the people holding the keys. That thought may occasionally keep an officer awake. Researchers still dispute exactly how access to particular tower spaces was managed at every stage of the late medieval period, especially because buildings were altered, demolished, renamed, and repurposed over centuries. Reconstructing your precise patrol route is therefore much harder than drawing a neat line across a modern visitor map. Your route would also depend on your assignment. You might spend long periods around one gate rather than wandering freely through every royal chamber like an unusually armed tourist. Still, familiarity with the complex is essential. You need to understand where danger could come from. The city lies beyond the landward defences. The river forms another approach. Walls provide protection, but also create blind corners. Towers provide observation but require climbing. Doors secure rooms but need watching. The moat adds another obstacle, though medieval moats are rarely the sparkling decorative ponds imagined in romantic illustrations. Water, mud, rubbish, drainage, and stagnant smells can create something far less poetic. One curious story connected with the tower's defences involved the long struggle to manage its moat properly. Water levels and sanitation become recurring problems across the centuries. The Thames is tidal, and maintaining a useful defensive water system beside it is not as simple as digging a trench and waiting for picturesque reflections on a warm day. Your nose may become an unofficial security instrument. You pass near storehouses. The tower has long served as a secure location for valuable royal resources, including arms and equipment. Weapons must be stored, maintained, counted, moved, and guarded. Bows need appropriate care, bowstrings dislike damp, metal rusts, wood warps. Nothing remains battle-ready simply because someone placed it dramatically against a wall. Maintenance is history's quiet companion. Someone oils, someone repairs, someone counts. Someone eventually discovers that 3 items are missing and begins asking uncomfortable questions. You move onward toward another tower. Some chambers can hold prisoners, but imprisonment here is not yet the tower's soul or even primary identity. Captives of political significance may be confined within the complex, sometimes under conditions shaped heavily by their rank and wealth. You will learn more about that later. For now, you simply note the secured entrance. A guard is already there, you exchange a nod. No conversation is necessary, you continue. The chapel bells give you another measure of time. Medieval life is structured not by wristwatches but by daylight. Bells, meals, religious observance, and established routines. You become skilled at judging the day from light and sound. Clouds complicate matters. English weather appears unwilling to cooperate with timekeeping. A breeze moves across the wall as you climb again. You pause near the battlements and look outward. London stretches beyond you, crowded and smoky. Church towers rise above roofs. The city walls still define much of the urban landscape, though settlement extends outside them, far below. People move with purposes completely unrelated to royal politics. From this height, they look small. So do you. If anyone is looking down from somewhere higher, that is perhaps the strange lesson of the tower. Everything is about scale. Massive walls surround small human concerns. Kings sleep behind defences built by dead kings. Guards protect doors that other guards protected before they were born. Prisoners occupy rooms where different prisoners will later become famous. The building lasts. People rotate through it. You rest one hand against the stone. It is cool beneath your palm despite the growing daylight. Then a voice calls from below. Your pause is finished. You descend carefully, because falling down a medieval staircase while trying to look professional would provide the garrison with entertainment for months. At the bottom, another task waits. The fortress is secure only if the men inside it are prepared to make it secure, and that means weapons, armour, helmets, lanterns, belts, uncomfortable straps, and all the equipment that looks impressive from a distance but becomes considerably less romantic once you have carried it for several hours. At the bottom of the stairs, the practical side of fortress life is waiting for you. There is nothing as especially poetic about it. Leather needs fastening, metal needs checking, a blade needs keeping dry, a strap has somehow twisted itself during the night, and your fingers, still slightly stiff from the morning cold, are expected to solve the problem without complaint. You begin with what you carry most comfortably. A dagger is small enough to remain useful without becoming a constant burden. Knives and daggers are ordinary objects in late medieval life, serving practical purposes as well as defensive ones. A sword carries greater status and obvious military value. Although quality varies enormously according to wealth, you check the weapon at your side. The scabbard protects the blade from weather and accidental damage. Leather, wood, metal fittings, and belts all require maintenance. Damp is a persistent enemy in a riverside fortress, and rust has no respect for royal authority. You draw the blade only far enough to inspect it. Metal whispers against the scabbard. Everything appears satisfactory. Back it goes. You're not wandering through the tower dramatically drawing your sword whenever a door creaks. That would make you less a guard and more a danger to nearby furniture. For many duties, a polearm is more practical. Bills are familiar weapons in 15th century England. Their shapes vary, but they generally combine a long wooden shaft with a metal head capable of cutting, thrusting, and hooking. They emerge partly from agricultural tools and become effective battlefield weapons in your hands. The advantage is obvious. Reach, if someone becomes violent at a gate. You would rather keep him several feet away than discover how good he is with a dagger at conversational distance. You balance the shaft. The wood feels smooth in places where hands have repeatedly gripped it. Weapons like this are less glamorous in later imagination than swords, but glamour is not particularly useful when controlling a doorway. The English billman becomes a familiar presence in armies of your period and beyond. During the Wars of the Roses, troops armed with bills fight alongside archers and men equipped with other weapons, forming an important part of infantry forces. You have lived through those wars. The phrase Wars of the Roses would mean little to you in the polished form later generations use. You understand particular kings, rival claims, noble families, battles, betrayals, local loyalties, and terrifying changes of fortune. The neat label comes later. History likes organizing chaos after everyone involved has finished experiencing it, nearby. Bows are being inspected. The longbow remains one of England's most famous military weapons, and by 1483 its reputation has been established through generations of warfare. An effective warbow requires strength, training, and repeated practice. Drawing one is not simply a matter of picking it up and pulling enthusiastically until something happens. Your shoulders would quickly explain the difference. Yew is especially prized for bow making. Though other woods can also be used, a good bow represents skilled craftsmanship, and the string must be protected from moisture. This last point matters greatly inside your damp fortress. A wet bowstring is nobody's friend. Archers therefore have good reason to keep strings protected until required. Some depictions and later accounts encourage the image of strings tucked beneath clothing or hats during bad weather. Although the exact habits of individual soldiers naturally vary. Imagine preparing to defend England while carefully worrying about a piece of cord becoming soggy. Heroism contains more maintenance than songs admit. You examine arrows as well. An arrow is not merely a straight stick with something sharp attached. Its shaft must be shaped properly. Fletching stabilizes flight. The head depends upon purpose and available supply. Producing large quantities for military use requires craftsmen, materials, storage, transport, and administration. Behind every famous volley stands somebody counting bundles. You can almost pity that man. Almost. Then comes protection for your head. A helmet may be among the most sensible pieces of equipment you own or are issued. 15th century helmets appear in many forms, from relatively simple open designs to sophisticated pieces associated with men wearing extensive plate armor for routine guard duty. Comfort competes constantly with protection. Put more metal on yourself and you become safer against certain threats. You also become heavier, hotter, noisier, and increasingly aware of every strap touching your body. Full plate armor of your period is far more mobile than the old myth of helpless knights being unable to stand suggests. Properly fitted armor distributes weight across the body, allowing experienced wearers to walk, run, mount horses, and fight. That does not mean it feels like silk pajamas. You are grateful that ordinary sentry duty does not require you to remain completely enclosed in an expensive harness from sunrise until bedtime. Your richer military superiors might possess excellent armor made by skilled specialists. You probably do not. Your protective equipment is more modest, perhaps incorporating pieces available according to your role, resources, and immediate threat. Exactly how a tower guard of your standing would be armed on a routine day in 1483 is one of those questions the surviving evidence refuses to answer neatly. Inventories can reveal weapons and armor held within royal stores, while accounts can reveal purchases and payments, but neither automatically tells us what you personally wear during this particular morning, so your equipment changes with circumstance. If danger increases, preparations increase. If the fortress expects trouble, weapons become easier to reach. If everything seems peaceful, nobody wishes to exhaust men merely for appearance. An appearance does matter. A visible weapon tells an approaching stranger that the gate is controlled. You do not need to wave it, you simply need to have it. There is quiet authority in standing still with a polearm. People tend to understand the suggestion. Your equipment includes less dramatic objects too. A belt may support useful items. Keys can be entrusted to particular men. Lanterns become essential when darkness covers passages and staircases. Fire itself requires caution, because enclosed buildings contain timber, textiles, straw, rushes, documents, and other wonderfully combustible materials. Your lantern does not illuminate a corridor like a modern electric light. It produces a modest pool of brightness. Beyond that pool, darkness remains. At night, shadows jump as the flame moves. A staircase that looks harmless at noon becomes a black opening descending somewhere unpleasant. You learn to move slowly. The tower also has fire precautions of the medieval variety, meaning mostly vigilance, sensible storage, access to water, and the hope that nobody does something spectacularly foolish. Human beings have been disappointing that hope for centuries. A small equipment check can therefore involve far more than weapons. Is your lantern sound? Do you have access to flame when required? Are doors properly secured? Are stored weapons dry? Has anything been moved? Is a fastening damaged? Has some ingenious colleague borrowed something without mentioning it? These questions occupy more of your working life than glorious combat. A peculiar survival from medieval military culture is the enormous importance attached to weapon maintenance even when no battle is imminent. Royal inventories sometimes preserve astonishing quantities of bows, arrows, armor, and other equipment. Such collections represent stored military potential, but stored potential becomes useless if neglected. You run your thumb carefully along a leather fastening. It will need attention soon, not immediately, soon. You make the mental note because equipment has an irritating tendency to fail, exactly when you postpone repairing it for one more day. Around you, other men perform similar checks. There is little ceremony. Someone complains about a strap. Someone else insists that a weapon has been returned to the wrong place. A third man offers an opinion nobody requested. The sounds are small and domestic despite the military setting. Wood touches stone. Metal rings softly. Leather creaks. A bow is flexed carefully, for a moment. The tower feels less like the centre of royal power and more like an enormous workshop filled with men preparing tools. And perhaps that is closer to reality. Weapons are tools. Armour is equipment. A fortress is machinery built from stone, timber, iron, water, and people. You are one moving part within it. The uncertainty lies in how often those parts are truly ready for crisis. Some specialists studying late medieval military administration emphasize the impressive scale of royal arsenals and organization, while others point to the inevitable gap between what an inventory claims exists and what can actually be placed into reliable hands at short notice. A list may say there are hundreds of useful objects. The objects themselves may disagree. You finish your inspection. Your sword sits comfortably enough. The polearm is sound. Your clothing is adjusted. The helmet remains manageable. You feel prepared, although perhaps not comfortable. Comfort is not in the job description. Then you hear activity near one of the entrances. Voices, hooves, the scrape of movement outside. Your equipment suddenly stops being a collection of inconvenient objects and becomes the visible authority of the fortress. Someone is approaching. This time, you will not simply watch another man decide what happens. You're moving toward the gate yourself, where every visitor presents the same deceptively simple problem. Do you let them in? The voices beyond the entrance grow clearer as you approach. A horse stamps against the ground. Harness fittings give a soft metallic jingle. Someone speaks with the impatient confidence of a person who expects doors to open when he arrives, which immediately tells you something useful. Rank has a sound. You reach your position and look outward. Visitors to the tower do not arrive as anonymous individuals. Clothing, horses, servants, weapons, badges, manner of speech, and companions provide clues about identity before anyone produces an explanation. In your world, appearance is part of the language of status. A well-dressed gentleman accompanied by servants presents a different problem from a lone labourer carrying a bundle. Neither automatically receives entry. You have orders. That distinction matters. Your job is not to decide personally who deserves access to a royal fortress. Your task is to enforce authority transmitted from above. Certain officers, servants, messengers, suppliers, craftsmen, soldiers, clerics, and noble visitors may have legitimate reasons to enter. Others do not. The difficulty is recognizing the difference. There is no laminated identification card, no photograph, no electronic gate, no helpful little green light. Instead, identity is established through familiarity, testimony, letters, seals, badges, recognizable liveries, companions, verbal instructions, and networks of trust. You become surprisingly skilled at remembering faces. The man waiting outside gives a name. Perhaps you know him. Perhaps you know the badge worn by one of his companions. Perhaps an officer has already warned you that someone matching his description will arrive. If so, the exchange is brief. But suppose you do not recognize him. Now the morning becomes more interesting. You ask his business. He may carry a letter. Documents matter enormously in royal government. Written orders travel between officials, and seals can authenticate communications. England in 1483 possesses a sophisticated administrative culture in which clerks produce and preserve enormous quantities of written material. Yet paper and parchment do not eliminate human judgment. A document can be misunderstood. A messenger can lie. A seal can be misused. An order can be outdated. Most dangerously, a perfectly genuine instruction may have been issued by someone whose authority changed yesterday. That last possibility is becoming increasingly relevant. Edward IV is dead. His 12-year-old son has been proclaimed Edward V. But the machinery of government is shifting around the young king. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, has been named Lord Protector, and powerful factions are manoeuvring for influence. Orders matter. So does knowing whose orders still matter. You cannot simply shrug and say politics is above your pay. Politics has walked directly up to your gate, for now. The visitor waits while his credentials are checked. He dislikes waiting. You can tell this does not concern you greatly. One quiet pleasure available to a medieval gate guard is watching an important man discover that a locked gate remains locked regardless of his facial expression. You keep your tone respectful. That is essential. A guard who insults the wrong gentleman may discover that the fortress walls are not high enough to protect him from consequences, but respect does not mean surrendering procedure. Someone is sent to confirm the arrival. You wait. The visitor waits. His horse waits with considerably less dignity, flicking its tail and shifting its weight. Eventually confirmation returns. He may enter. You move aside and the little party passes through. Hooves strike the surface beyond you. Servants follow. The visitor disappears farther into the complex, and the gate returns to its normal rhythm. That rhythm can change quickly. Deliveries arrive. Food must enter. Fuel must enter. Weapons, clothing, building materials, messages, animals, and countless ordinary supplies have to pass through controlled points. A fortress cannot survive by sealing itself completely from the world it is meant to resist. Security therefore contains a contradiction. You must keep unwanted people out while constantly allowing wanted people in, and wanted people bring objects. A cart approaches later. This requires another sort of attention. The driver may be familiar, his cargo may be expected. Even so, gates are vulnerable places. A cart can obstruct movement. Goods can conceal things. Animals can panic. Crowds can gather. You watch carefully. The tower's medieval defences have developed specifically to control approach and movement by the late 13th century. Major expansions under Edward III had strengthened the outer defences, moat, entrances, and river access. Those improvements still shape your working environment nearly 2 centuries later. The gatehouse is not merely an architectural decoration, it is a filter. Anyone entering moves through spaces designed to expose them to observation and restriction. You stand within that system. A curious feature of medieval security is how much information can be communicated through badges and livery. Powerful lords distribute identifying clothing or badges to followers, creating visible networks of allegiance. During the political struggles of the 15th century, such symbols can carry considerable weight. You notice them automatically. A badge tells you whom a man serves, at least. It tells you whom he claims to serve. There is the complication. Political symbols are useful because people recognize them. Political symbols are dangerous for exactly the same reason. You learn not to stare. You certainly learn not to make jokes. Imagine seeing the badge of a powerful noble family and announcing that you preferred last year's design. Your career need not end creatively. Another messenger arrives. This one is breathing hard. Urgency changes the atmosphere. He gives his message to the appropriate person, or produces authorization that allows him to proceed. You may never learn what he carries. That is another discipline of guard work. You see fragments. You do not necessarily receive explanations. A nobleman enters looking angry. A messenger leaves quickly. An officer gives new instructions. A door that was open yesterday is secured today. You notice all of it. You understand only part of it. For historians trying to reconstruct tower security in your period, that fragmentation remains a problem. Surviving administrative records illuminate offices, personnel, royal orders, expenses, and political events, but they rarely preserve the exact spoken procedure followed by a sentry confronting an unexpected visitor. There's no surviving handbook conveniently titled How to Work the Morning Gate in 1483, so the details must be approached through broader evidence about medieval household organisation, military discipline, fortification, documentary practice, and social hierarchy. What remains certain is that access cannot be casual. Too much is protected here. Royal persons may be present, prisoners may be held, weapons are stored, officials work inside, valuable possessions and records require security, and the fortress itself carries symbolic importance. Taking control of the tower means more than occupying a useful building, because of its relationship with a monarchy in London. Possession of it signals political power. You understand this instinctively. If armed men belonging to an uncertain faction suddenly appear at the gate, you do not invite them inside for ale while everyone discusses constitutional theory. You close things fast. That possibility keeps you alert even during ordinary traffic. The hours pass, faces come and go. You begin categorizing people almost without thinking. Known servant, expected supplier, officer, messenger, cleric, soldier, craftsman, someone important enough that another man immediately hurries forward to handle the situation. Your favorite category, occasionally, a person simply wants information. Perhaps he has business with someone inside. Perhaps he has brought a delivery to the wrong entrance. Perhaps he believes confidence will substitute for authorization. You disappoint him gently. The gate remains closed. Beyond it, London continues moving. You hear carts and animals, street cries carried unevenly on the air, and bells marking portions of the day. The smell of smoke mixes with the river's dampness. Your stomach begins contributing its own commentary. Breakfast was not generous enough. Lunch, or the nearest medieval equivalent your routine permits, is becoming increasingly attractive. You glance toward the interior. Another man will eventually relieve you. That simple system is essential because vigilance decays when fatigue grows. Nobody can stare attentively at an entrance forever, although judging from some commanders' expectations, they may wish to test the theory. Your relief finally appears. You exchange necessary information. Nothing alarming has occurred. Several people entered legitimately. Several left. One visitor had to wait. The kingdom survives. You surrender the position and move away, almost immediately. Your attention shifts from royal security to something much more primitive. Food. The smells reaching you from deeper inside the complex seem stronger now. Smoke. Warm grain. Perhaps meat. Perhaps onions. Definitely ale somewhere nearby. You follow those smells toward the guard room and the less glamorous machinery that keeps armed men functional. Because before you can protect kings, prisoners, gates, weapons, and England itself, somebody really ought to feed you. You follow the smell with considerably more enthusiasm than you followed your patrol. By the time you reach the place where you can eat, your stomach has been reminding you of its existence for quite a while. Guarding royal authority may sound impressive, but royal authority does not prevent hunger, if anything. Standing in cold air while watching other people carry baskets of food through a gate makes hunger feel unusually personal. You settle among other men. The room is warmer than the passage outside, although warmth brings its own collection of smells. Smoke hangs in the air, damp wool slowly dries near the heat, leather, sweat, old rushes, food, and ale blend into an aroma that no modern hotel would willingly advertise. You hardly notice. There is food. Bread forms one of the foundations of your diet. Its quality varies according to grain, price, and status. Wheat bread is desirable, while poorer people often rely more heavily on bread made from mixed grains or coarser flour. Your portion is unlikely to resemble the soft white slices wrapped neatly in plastic that a modern sleeper might know. It has substance. You tear into it. Depending on what supplies are available, your meal may include pottage, cheese, onions, peas, beans, fish, or meat. Pottage is wonderfully practical, a thick preparation that can combine grains, vegetables, herbs, and whatever else the household can reasonably place into a pot. It is not glamorous. Neither are you at this moment. You're hungry enough that glamour can wait. A bowl arrives warm in your hands. Steam reaches your face. You breathe it in before taking the first mouthful. Salt matters, so do herbs and onions. The medieval English diet is often imagined as endless grey mush interrupted occasionally by enormous roasted animals. But reality is more varied. What you eat depends strongly on wealth, season, location, religious observance, and access to markets. London gives you an advantage. This is one of Europe's major cities, supplied through an extensive network of farms, fisheries, markets, merchants, and river traffic. The tower's royal and administrative importance also requires organised provisioning. Food must arrive whether politics is calm or chaotic. People rarely stop needing dinner because the succession is disputed. You reach for your drink. Ale is common. The familiar claim that medieval people drink alcohol because all water is universally unsafe is far too simple. People certainly drink water when suitable sources are available, and medieval communities understand perfectly well that some water tastes cleaner than other water. Ale is popular for many reasons. It provides calories. It is part of ordinary diet. Brewing is deeply embedded in household and commercial life, and it is consumed at different strengths. The ale in your hand is not necessarily designed to make you stagger around the battlements declaring loyalty to whichever king you can still pronounce. You're working. Drunkenness while responsible for a gate would be an ambitious career choice. Still, the men around you appreciate their drink. Conversation becomes easier once bowls are full. Someone complains about an officer. Someone else complains about the weather. A third man has somehow managed to complain about both in the same sentence. This is perhaps one of history's great continuities. Put several workers in a room with food and eventually management will be discussed. You listen. Guardroom conversation gives you information that formal orders never provide. Who has arrived? Which nobleman has been seen? Which officer appears worried? Has anything unusual been moved? Why were extra men posted near one part of the fortress? Is somebody expecting trouble? Rumour mixes freely with observation. You learn to separate the two, or at least you try. One man claims that a servant heard from another servant that important letters arrived during the night. Another says, nonsense. A third insists that his cousin knows a man in Westminster who has heard something much worse. You keep eating. The safest response to dangerous gossip is often an occupied mouth. The political networks surrounding the English crown make rumour especially powerful in 1483. News travels through letters, messengers, proclamations, markets, churches, noble households, and simple conversation. It can move surprisingly quickly, though accuracy tends to suffer along the journey. There is no morning newspaper waiting beside your bowl. Instead, news arrives as pieces: a name, a destination, a reported arrest, a whispered argument. You assemble a picture slowly, and sometimes incorrectly. Your companions provide entertainment as well as information. Dice are familiar objects in medieval England. Gambling is widespread enough to concern authorities repeatedly, particularly when soldiers become more interested in games than discipline. Perhaps someone produces a pair during an idle period. The cubes are small. The argument they create is not. Coins appear. One man wins. Another immediately develops a detailed theory explaining why the dice are unfair. Some human traditions require no improvement. Games can include dice, board games, storytelling, riddles, singing, or simply exchanging increasingly unbelievable stories about previous military service. Every garrison contains at least one man who appears to have personally participated in every significant event of the previous 20 years. You suspect he would remember fighting at Crecy if given enough ale, despite the battle having occurred in 1346. There are quieter tasks too. Clothing needs repair. You examine a seam that has begun to loosen. Textiles are valuable enough that garments are maintained rather than casually discarded. Patches are normal. Shoes require attention. Leather needs care. A torn piece of clothing does not become fashionable simply because you call it distressed. You repair what you can. Perhaps another man possesses better sewing skills than you. You do not mock him. A soldier who can mend his own clothing has solved a problem. A soldier who cannot is currently staring at the problem. Smoke drifts across the room and catches in your throat. Medieval indoor air can be unpleasant. Fires provide essential warmth and cooking, but ventilation varies. Soot accumulates. Eyes water. Clothing absorbs smoke until the scent follows you everywhere. Your future descendants may romanticize the smell of a wood fire. They should try wearing it continuously for 6 months. The guardroom itself is cramped rather than luxurious. Benches, stools, chests, tables, equipment, and human bodies compete for space. Personal privacy is limited. Sleeping arrangements for men attached to military or household service vary, and not every guard necessarily lives permanently within one neat barracks building. The surviving evidence does not provide a perfect room assignment for every ordinary man serving at the tower in your year. That uncertainty matters. Researchers reconstruct daily life from household accounts, building records, military documents, archaeology, surviving architecture, and comparison with similar institutions. These sources can show patterns without recording whether you personally prefer the corner nearest the fire, and you do. Everyone does. The problem is that the corner nearest the fire belongs psychologically to whoever reaches it first. A small quarrel breaks out over space. Nothing serious. A shoulder moves. A muttered insult follows. Someone laughs. The tension dissolves. Living closely with armed men requires a certain tolerance for irritation. You work together, eat together, perhaps sleep near one another, and spend hours with personalities you would never voluntarily invite into your home. Friendship develops anyway. So does resentment. You know which man can be trusted during a difficult watch. You know who snores. You know who borrows things without returning them. You know who becomes gloomy after drinking. You know whose stories improve every time he tells them. These relationships matter when trouble comes. A fortress depends upon walls. But walls do not watch themselves. People do. Your meal gradually disappears. The bowl is nearly empty. You wipe up the last traces with bread rather than waste them. Outside, footsteps cross the courtyard. Somewhere a bell sounds. The day is moving onward, and the brief comfort of food is already beginning to end. You sit for another moment. Warmth settles into your hands. Conversation becomes softer. It would be easy to remain here. Unfortunately, nobody has employed you as royal professional bench occupier. An order reaches the room. You're needed elsewhere. You rise with a quiet internal sigh and adjust your belt. This assignment takes you deeper into the fortress, away from the open gate and toward locked rooms where security becomes more personal. Behind some of those doors are people rather than weapons. Some are wealthy, some are frightened. Some may still possess servants, fine clothing, books, and money despite being unable to leave. You have guarded entrances from strangers. Now you are going to guard prisoners from freedom. The warmth of the guardroom stays with you for only a few corridors. Stone quickly takes it back as you move deeper into the tower, Ordinary conversation fades behind you. Your boots sound louder here, each step briefly returning from the walls. A narrow opening admits a pale strip of daylight, but it does little to warm the passage. At the end waits a locked door. The key turns with familiar resistance. You hear the mechanism shift, push the heavy door inward, and enter a part of fortress life that later generations will remember far more vividly than your meals, your aching feet, or your endless hours beside a gate. There is a prisoner here. Perhaps that word immediately creates an image in your mind. A dark dungeon, chains fixed to a dripping wall, rats waiting in corners with suspicious enthusiasm. For some captives across medieval Europe, imprisonment can indeed be miserable. Confinement may involve cold, hunger, restraint, disease, isolation, and filthy surroundings. But the tower is more complicated. A wealthy political prisoner can live under conditions that seem surprisingly comfortable to modern eyes, depending on status, wealth, offence, and royal instructions. A captive might occupy furnished rooms, receive visitors, keep servants, purchase additional food, wear fine clothing, write letters, read, pray, and move within limited areas under supervision. The essential punishment is not necessarily physical discomfort, it is the inability to leave. That difference becomes obvious as you approach the chamber. The man inside may have a bed. Perhaps there is a chest, a table, a stool, candles, and clothing, if he has sufficient resources and permission. His meals may be considerably better than yours. This seems mildly unfair. You possess the freedom to walk out of the chamber, however, and that is the luxury he cannot purchase. Rank follows people through prison doors. Medieval society does not suddenly become equal because someone turns a key. A noble captive remains a noble. Officers may address him according to his station. His treatment can reflect his political importance, the king's intentions, and the prisoner's ability to pay for comforts. Indeed, imprisonment could generate expenses charged to captives or their supporters, food, fuel, servants, and accommodations might all become matters of negotiation and money. You begin to realize that a medieval prison can occasionally resemble an extremely unpleasant hotel where departure requires royal permission. The comparison ends there. Hotels rarely accuse guests of treason. You remain near the doorway while another man completes some routine business. The prisoner asks a question. When may he receive a visitor? You do not know. He asks whether a letter has arrived. Again, you do not know. Perhaps you genuinely lack the information. Perhaps you have been told not to discuss it. Knowing when to remain silent is part of your work. The tower has held important captives long before your lifetime. One particularly famous prisoner was Ranulph Flambard, Bishop of Durham, confined there in 1100 by Henry III. His story has survived because he managed something that must haunt every guard's professional imagination. He escaped. According to the traditional account, Flambard obtained a rope concealed inside a container of wine, entertained or intoxicated his keepers, and lowered himself from the White Tower. Whether every colourful detail reached later chroniclers unchanged is another question. But the escape itself is well established. You would prefer your own name not to enter history for similar reasons. Guard on duty when important prisoner disappeared is not an inscription you want associated with your family. So you check doors, you watch visitors, you notice what enters and what leaves. A basket of food is not merely a basket of food if somebody has hidden a message beneath the bread. A servant is not merely a servant if he carries information between political allies. A priest might come to hear confession and provide spiritual comfort. But privileged access can also create opportunities for communication. Security becomes intimate here. At the outer gate you study strangers. Here you study familiar faces. The prisoner himself may gradually become familiar. That creates another complication. You see him in ordinary moments. He wakes tired. He eats. He complains about the cold. He asks after relatives. He becomes irritated when permission is delayed. Perhaps he tells jokes. Perhaps he's unbearable. Perhaps he behaves with such courtesy that guarding him begins to feel uncomfortable. It is easier to imagine a prisoner as an enemy when you never hear him ask whether his child is well. You're not supposed to become his friend. But neither are you a machine. Days create recognition. Recognition creates sympathy. And sympathy can become dangerous. Political prisoners are especially troublesome because their fortunes may reverse. The man you guard today could be pardoned tomorrow. The nobleman everyone fears this month could lose his head politically, or literally. Before winter, a family presently excluded from power might return to influence. You therefore avoid unnecessary cruelty. This is partly human decency. It is also sensible career planning. England has demonstrated repeatedly during the 15th century that winners do not always remain winners. Consider Henry VI. He had been king, lost the throne, regained it briefly, and lost it again. After Edward the Thor returned to power in 1471, Henry died while held in the Tower. The official explanation at the time attributed his death to melancholy after hearing of his son's death, although suspicion that he was deliberately killed appeared quickly and has never entirely vanished. No surviving testimony allows you to stand beside that chamber and confidently reconstruct every moment. The silence itself is revealing. Royal prisons are places where information can be controlled. You understand that without needing a historian to explain it. A guard sees a door close. Later, someone asks what happened behind it. Sometimes the guard truly does not know. You move farther along the passage. Another chamber may contain someone of lower status, and the difference can be considerable. Money determines comfort everywhere in your society. A poorer captive cannot easily purchase better meals or employ servants. Conditions may become harsher simply because fewer resources surround him. Then there is physical restraint. Chains, irons, or closer confinement can be used when escape is feared or punishment demands it. Yet you should not imagine every Tower prisoner permanently shackled underground. The popular dungeon image owes much to later storytelling. Rooms above ground can be prisons perfectly well. A beautiful view through a narrow window does not become freedom merely because the Thames looks pleasant in sunlight. You pause near one such opening. Below, a boat moves slowly along the river. The prisoner can hear it too. That may be one of the cruelest sounds. Oars dip, water splashes, people are travelling somewhere. He is not. The air in the chamber carries traces of wax, fabric, damp plaster, and yesterday's fire. It is not unbearable. That almost makes the confinement stranger. Nothing here needs to scream imprisonment. The locked door does enough. Your duties can include escorting captives within permitted areas. A prisoner might attend worship, meet authorized visitors, or move between rooms under guard. Each movement creates a small security problem. Doors must open, routes must be controlled, other people must be kept away, then the prisoner must return. You become aware of keys again. They feel heavier around prisoners at a storehouse door. Losing a key threatens property. Here, it threatens authority. There are stories of captives bribing keepers throughout medieval history, and the possibility is perfectly believable. Guards are human. Humans need money. Wealthy prisoners may possess money. You can see the equation forming. Perhaps a captive offers a gift for some harmless convenience, a better candle, an extra visitor, a message delivered, nothing serious. That is how serious things often begin. You refuse, at least. You hope you refuse. Your wages suddenly seem relevant. The exact degree of freedom granted to individual prisoners in this period cannot always be recovered. Conditions change according to orders and personalities, and surviving accounts often illuminate exceptional captives more clearly than ordinary ones. Two people held within the same fortress might therefore experience imprisonment very differently. There is no single tower prison experience. There are locked lives stacked beside one another. You finish the check. The prisoner is where he should be. The servant's movements are accounted for. The door closes. Your key turns. Clunk. For a moment you remain outside, listening, nothing. Then you walk away. The corridor gradually brightens as you approach a busier part of the complex. Voices return. Servants pass carrying household goods. Somewhere dishes knock together. Fine cloth flashes briefly through an open doorway. The atmosphere changes almost absurdly quickly. Behind you sits confinement. Ahead lies royal domestic life, because the tower does not separate prison, fortress, administration, and palace into convenient modern categories. All of them occupy the same guarded world. And now you're leaving locked captives behind to enter the stranger territory of royal servants, noble visitors, ceremonial expectations, and people whose greatest danger to you may be using the wrong form of address. The first warning that you have crossed into a different kind of territory is not a wall or locked gate, it is fabric. A servant passes carrying folded cloth finer than anything you own. Another follows with a vessel in both hands, moving carefully enough to suggest that dropping it would produce consequences extending well beyond the loss of the object. Voices come from an adjoining chamber, restrained and purposeful, while somewhere farther ahead a door opens and releases a brief breath of warmer air, scented with wax and food. You straighten almost automatically. Prisoners require vigilance. Royal households require manners. The tower is a military stronghold, but it is also a royal residence, and that second identity changes everything around you. Kings and queens have occupied apartments here for generations. Royal stays bring servants, clerks, chaplains, cooks, gentlemen, ladies, officers, messengers, craftsmen, and enough supplies to make the fortress feel suddenly crowded. A king does not simply arrive carrying a small bag. A royal household moves like an institution. Beds, textiles, plate, clothing, documents, food, horses, fuel, utensils, and personal servants all become part of the machinery surrounding the monarch. Rooms must be prepared, kitchens must function, security must tighten, and somebody has to stand beside the doors. Naturally, that somebody is often a man like you. You watch two servants hurry past. They know where they're going. You remain where you've been placed. That distinction is useful because wandering into royal chambers out of curiosity would demonstrate initiative in exactly the wrong way. Access to the king is carefully structured. Medieval monarchy depends heavily upon personal presence. But personal presence does not mean public availability. The people closest to a ruler can acquire enormous influence simply because they control information and opportunity. Who speaks to the king, whose letter reaches him, who waits outside? Who is admitted immediately? Such questions can shape careers and policies. You may see only the outer edge of that process. A nobleman approaches with attendants. His clothing announces wealth before you identify him. Fine wool. Perhaps silk or velvet for those who can afford such luxuries. Careful tailoring, decorative elements, and rich colours separate elite dress from ordinary clothing. Colour itself can be expensive. Certain dyes require costly materials or complicated processes. Clothing therefore communicates resources in a way that everyone understands. You step aside according to instruction. The nobleman barely notices you. This is probably good. Being memorable to powerful people is not always an advantage. You watch his attendants follow him inside. Then the door closes. Your world becomes quiet again. For several minutes, Your greatest responsibility is preventing anyone unauthorized from crossing a threshold. It feels absurdly simple, yet the entire royal household depends upon controlled thresholds. The chamber beyond may contain conversations that affect the kingdom. Your role is not to understand them. Your role is to make sure the wrong ears do not join them. That requires sensitivity to hierarchy. A servant carrying linen might have routine access to one area but not another. A clerk may be permitted through because his work demands it. A nobleman of impressive rank can still be asked to wait if the king or senior officer requires privacy. You begin recognizing household officers by sight. They possess their own responsibilities, privileges, and servants. Medieval royal administration can appear confusing from outside because domestic service and political government overlap constantly. A man responsible for the king's personal household may also be politically influential. A chamber can become an office. A meal can become a diplomatic occasion. A conversation beside a fireplace can matter more than a formal gathering held elsewhere. The distinction between private and public power is blurry. You hear activity from the kitchens. If the household is large, feeding it becomes a formidable operation. Bread, meat, fish, ale, wine, spices, vegetables, salt, fuel, and countless smaller necessities must be obtained, transported, stored, prepared, and distributed. Royal dining is highly structured. Status determines where people sit, what they receive, and how they are served. Meals can display wealth as deliberately as clothing does. You, unfortunately, are not invited to test the finest dishes. You receive the smell. Again, a roasting scent travels through the passage. You decide medieval social hierarchy would be easier to tolerate if aristocratic food were less aromatic. Among the stranger luxuries appearing in elite medieval households are imported spices such as pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, and saffron. These are valuable goods carried across enormous trading networks before reaching English tables. Spices are not simply used to disguise rotten meat. Despite a persistent modern myth, anyone wealthy enough to purchase expensive imported spices is generally wealthy enough to obtain fresh meat. They use spices because they enjoy them. The rich, it turns out, have been seasoning dinner for quite some time. Another servant passes carrying candles. Wax candles are desirable in wealthy settings because they burn more cleanly than cheaper tallow alternatives. Beeswax itself is valuable, and lighting large residences consumes considerable quantities. At night, royal comfort therefore glows at a price. Your own lantern suddenly seems modest. You imagine the amount of work required simply to illuminate these rooms after sunset. Candles must be made or purchased, candlesticks maintained, wicks trimmed, flames watched. Nothing about medieval luxury operates automatically. Every beautiful chamber depends upon invisible labour. Someone washes linen, someone empties waste, someone carries water, someone chops fuel, someone repairs a hinge, someone scrubs a surface, someone wakes before the noble person who will never learn his name. You understand that last person very well. A chapel forms another important part of royal life within the tower. St. Peter ad Vincula serves the fortress community, while the chapel of St. John inside the White Tower represents an older Norman sacred space. Religion is woven into daily routines rather than confined neatly to occasional private belief. Prayer shapes the rhythm of life. Feast days structure the calendar. Clergy move through royal and military environments. A guard may hear bells or religious services while performing entirely secular duties. You pause as a cleric passes. He receives appropriate respect and continues onward. The political world of 1483 is deeply religious, even when its inhabitants behave in ways that seem spectacularly inconsistent with Christian teaching. This does not strike your contemporaries as evidence that religion is unimportant. People can sincerely fear God while also pursuing power with alarming enthusiasm. Human contradiction is not a modern invention. You hear laughter behind a door. For a moment the tower feels almost pleasant. There are warm chambers, conversation, good food, fine clothing, music on suitable occasions, prayer, servants moving efficiently through familiar routines. Then you remember the prisoner behind the locked door you left earlier. Palace and prison sit within the same walls. That contrast is not accidental. Royal power rewards and restrains. It welcomes one man into a chamber while preventing another from leaving his. The buildings themselves embody that authority. Later centuries will emphasize the tower's grim reputation so heavily that its role as a royal palace can fade from popular memory. Even specialists must sometimes work through incomplete architectural evidence when reconstructing precisely how particular late medieval apartments were arranged. Because many buildings have disappeared or changed drastically. A doorway visible to you in 1483 may not survive. A chamber important to you may leave only foundations. Names shift. Functions shift. The fortress you know is not identical to the one tourist will eventually walk through. You would probably find their version unnervingly clean. Another cluster of footsteps approaches. This time you recognize an officer and adjust your posture. Instructions are given. A visitor is expected. Certain movement is to be restricted temporarily. You acknowledge the order. No explanation follows. You do not ask for one. Remember the lesson from the prison corridor. Information arrives according to rank. Curiosity does not create entitlement. Still, you notice the atmosphere. Servants seem slightly more alert. Messages move frequently. Conversations stop when particular people approach. The tower can appear calm while politics gathers behind closed doors. That is how power often works. Outside the royal rooms, daily life continues almost stubbornly. A servant drops something and mutters. A dog trots briefly across an open space before being called back. Laundry moves. Food arrives. Someone complains about missing equipment. The king's business and somebody's missing spoon occupy the same afternoon. You begin to feel the walls pressing around you again. Not physically, politically. Perhaps what you need is distance. Later, your duty carries you toward an outer position where London spreads beyond the defences. The transition is immediate. Air replaces warm corridors. Wind touches your face. The enormous city opens before you. You can hear it before you can understand individual sounds, bells, carts, voices, animals, river traffic, thousands upon thousands of lives moving outside the fortress. You breathe more deeply inside the tower. Rank determines every doorway. Out there, another hierarchy waits, but it is noisier, dirtier, broader, and far less controlled. London is surrounding you, and from the walls, you're about to watch the medieval city wake into its full, complicated roar. The city reaches you first as sound. From your position near the outer defences, thousands of separate noises merge into a restless murmur. Cartwheels grind over uneven streets. Horses strike hard ground with iron shoes. Church bells answer one another across rooftops. Traders call to customers. Dogs bark. Somewhere a hammer repeats the same metallic note until you wonder whether the craftsman intends to continue until sunset. Then the wind shifts. London reaches you as smell. Wood smoke hangs above the houses. Cooking fires contribute their own scents. Animals leave unmistakable evidence of their presence. Workshops release smoke, hides, dyes, grease, metal, and other less identifiable aromas into streets already carrying household waste and mud. The Thames adds dampness. Fish, boats, refuse, and tidal river mud. You breathe it all in. Home. London in 1483 is among the largest cities in England by an enormous margin. Although calculating its exact population is difficult, estimates vary, but tens of thousands of people live within the city and surrounding settlements. To you, it feels endless. The medieval city is still concentrated around the old Roman and medieval walls, with gates controlling major routes. Beyond them, suburbs continue expanding along roads and around religious institutions. The tower occupies the eastern edge of this busy landscape. From your elevated position, the relationship makes perfect sense. The fortress watches London. London watches the fortress. Royal authority in stone faces an urban population whose cooperation every English ruler needs. You look westward. Church towers rise everywhere. Medieval London contains an extraordinary number of religious buildings, from parish churches to monasteries, hospitals, chapels, and major institutions. Bells divide the day into recognizable portions and accompany worship, funerals, celebrations, warnings, and public life. If you somehow removed every bell from London, you suspect half the population would immediately become late for something. Below, people stream through narrow streets. There is no single London crowd. Merchants in expensive clothing pass apprentices. Servants hurry on errands. Clerks carry documents. Labourers shoulder loads. Priests move between churches. Children appear wherever adults would prefer them not to. Foreign merchants add other languages and accents. London is connected to European trade through the Thames. Goods arriving from overseas can include wine, cloth, spices, timber, metal products, luxury items, and countless smaller commodities. English wool and cloth remain central to the kingdom's economy. The city therefore smells terrible and participates in international commerce at the same time. Progress comes in complicated packages. You watch a boat move downstream. The river is one of London's great highways. Travelling by water can be faster and more comfortable than struggling through congested streets. Watermen carry passengers between landing places, while barges transport goods that would be awkward to move overland. The river is also dangerous. Boats collide, people fall in, weather changes, currents and tides matter. Knowing the Thames is a skill. A competent waterman understands the river almost as intimately as you understand the tower's passages. Along the waterfront, cranes, wharves, warehouses, and landing places support trade. Barrels roll, ropes tighten, men shout instructions. Fish arrive in large quantities because religious practice creates regular demand. The Christian calendar includes numerous days when meat consumption is restricted, making fish commercially important. Freshwater species, sea fish, salted fish, dried fish, and preserved products all circulate through London. Your nose can probably identify the relevant district before your eyes do. Markets create their own geography. Certain trades cluster in particular streets. Names attached to London locations often preserve memories of occupations or products sold there. Butchers, fishmongers, bakers, goldsmiths, mercers, vintners, and many other trades organize themselves through companies and fraternities that regulate aspects of commercial life. You know some neighborhoods by what they sell, others by what they smell like. These categories overlap. A street containing butchers is difficult to misunderstand. Animals may be driven through urban spaces before slaughter. Chickens wander when nobody has authorized them to wander. Pigs appear frequently enough in medieval urban regulations to suggest that citizens repeatedly fail to keep them where officials would prefer. One old concern across medieval towns involves wandering pigs causing damage or creating danger in streets. Imagine surviving plague, political rebellion, and dynastic conflict only to have your afternoon ruined by somebody else's pig. Municipal government attempts to regulate urban life. London is not an uncontrolled heap of houses where everyone simply throws everything wherever inspiration strikes. Authorities issue rules concerning markets, waste, building practices, fires, trades, street obstruction, and public order. Enforcement, naturally, is another matter. A regulation exists because someone has been doing the thing being regulated, usually repeatedly. Waste remains a persistent challenge. Households generate refuse, animals generate more, crafts produce unpleasant byproducts. Human waste must go somewhere. People use cesspits, latrines, drains, carts, and designated disposal arrangements. Though illegal dumping also occurs, the Thames receives more than any river deserves. Yet the familiar image of medieval people deliberately emptying every chamber pot from every window without warning should not be treated as universal daily behaviour. Cities understand that waste creates problems and attempt to manage it. Attempts are not always successful. You glance down toward the moat and decide not to become philosophical about sanitation. Instead, you focus on movement. A group passes along a road outside. You wonder where they're going. Perhaps to a market. Perhaps to work. Perhaps to one of London's taverns. Alehouses and taverns provide drink, food, lodging, conversation, gambling, business opportunities, and trouble in varying proportions. Wine tends to be associated more strongly with taverns and wealthier customers. While ale is consumed across society, you know establishments where a man can spend a pleasant evening. You know others where entering with a full purse and leaving with the same amount would qualify as a miracle. Crime exists. Of course, theft, assault, burglary, fraud, and disorder appear frequently enough in records to remind us that medieval London contains the same mixture of desperation and opportunism found in large cities throughout history. But you do not walk through every street expecting attack. Most people are trying to work. Fear makes poor economic policy. London functions because strangers cooperate constantly. Buyers trust sellers enough to trade. Employers hire workers. Boatmen carry passengers. Apprentices serve masters. Neighbours share information. Officials enforce rules. Not perfectly. Enough. That distinction keeps cities alive. Disease is harder to negotiate with. The Black Death first devastated England more than a century before your watch, but plague returns repeatedly in later outbreaks. Other diseases are equally familiar: dysentery, respiratory illness, infections, childhood diseases, and complications from injuries can kill people who would survive easily with modern treatment. You do not understand microorganisms, you do understand patterns. Bad air worries people. Corruption and foul smells seem connected with illness according to common medical ideas. During epidemics, people may seek cleaner environments, prayer, remedies, or distance from infected areas. The precise population of late medieval London remains difficult to pin down, partly because surviving evidence is incomplete and demographic shocks repeatedly alter the city. Tax records, wills, property documents, parish evidence, and other sources provide fragments rather than a perfect census. Your view from the tower provides no numbers, only roofs. So many roofs. Smoke rises from them into the afternoon sky. Beyond the city lie fields, villages, roads, and countryside supplying the enormous appetite below you. London cannot feed itself. Grain arrives, animals arrive, firewood arrives, vegetables arrive, fish arrives. Every day depends upon movement from elsewhere. The tower does too, for all its walls. It is no more self-sufficient than the city surrounding it. A bell sounds. Another answers farther away. You rest your hands and listen. There is entertainment somewhere below as well. Inns host conversation and games. Performers appear in public spaces. Bear baiting and other animal spectacles attract audiences in this period. Although their violence would be uncomfortable to many modern listeners, religious festivals, processions, music, storytelling, dancing, and seasonal celebrations provide less brutal diversions. Life is not permanently grim. People laugh, they flirt, they gossip, they sing badly after drinking. A child chases something through a street. Someone buys a pie, someone loses a coin, someone proposes marriage, someone immediately regrets proposing marriage. History happens while all of them are busy. The light begins changing. Shadows lengthen beside buildings. Smoke becomes more visible against the lowering sun. The city will not become silent after dark, but movement will decrease. Gates will matter more. Lamps and candles will replace daylight in wealthier interiors. While many streets become profoundly dark, your own duties will change with it. You turn away from London. The fortress walls rise around you again. Soon you will exchange this sprawling panorama for battlements, passwords, lanterns, cold air, and the particular uneasiness that arrives when every ordinary noise becomes invisible. The day has shown you thousands of people. The night will reduce the world to footsteps. By the time the last warmth has drained from the western sky, the tower has changed character. The stone has not moved. The gates remain where they stood this morning. The Thames continues sliding beside the fortress, carrying boats through the deepening evening, yet darkness rearranges everything. Familiar distances become uncertain. Corners deepen, and passages you crossed casually in daylight now seem to possess considerably more corridor than you remember. Your night watch begins with preparation. A lantern is checked. Instructions are repeated, posts are assigned. Men who have spent the day working surrender places to men expected to remain alert while sensible people sleep. You envy the sensible people. The air has cooled sharply. Damp rises from the river, slipping through clothing and settling against your skin. You adjust your outer layer and begin climbing. The staircase twists upward. Your lantern reveals only a few steps at once. The flame trembles whenever air enters through an opening, throwing your shadow against the wall in distorted shapes. You know perfectly well that the shadow belongs to you. You still look twice. At the top, open air meets you. London has become a field of scattered lights. Windows glow here and there. Fires shine briefly through doorways. Most of the city, however, is profoundly darker than anything a modern urban listener normally experiences. There are no electric streetlights washing the clouds orange, no illuminated signs, no headlights. Darkness is not an inconvenience around the edges of medieval life. It is an environment. Your eyes need time to adapt. The battlements beneath your hand feel cold and slightly damp. Beyond them, the Thames is almost invisible except where a light catches moving water. You begin your circuit. Night guarding depends heavily upon listening. During daylight, your eyes provide information from a distance. Darkness strips much of that away. Now you hear first. Water touches stone below. Wind moves through an opening. A wooden shutter knocks somewhere inside the complex. Footsteps cross a courtyard. You stop. Listen. The footsteps continue at an ordinary pace. A familiar voice follows. Nothing. You move again. The tower's gates become especially important after dark. Medieval urban life is strongly shaped by controlled access during nighttime hours. London's own city gates are shut according to established routines, while households and fortified sites secure entrances against thieves, disorder, and unexpected arrivals. Closing a gate changes the meaning of the space behind it. During the day, the tower receives a steady current of people and supplies. At night, every interruption becomes noticeable. A late arrival needs explanation. A stranger has fewer innocent reasons to linger near a royal fortress in darkness, and an armed stranger has fewer still. Passwords or agreed signals can help men distinguish legitimate movement from suspicious approach. particularly during heightened security. Exactly what words your watch uses tonight have vanished from memory. That is probably appropriate. A secret password that survives for more than 5 centuries has performed rather badly as a secret. You reach another century. A brief exchange confirms that all is quiet. Neither of you speaks loudly. There is something about darkness that lowers the human voice even when no rule demands it. You continue. From somewhere outside comes a burst of laughter, an alehouse. Perhaps. The sound travels through the night, followed by a fragment of song so enthusiastically off-key that you briefly consider it a threat to public order. Then silence returns. You smile to yourself. London sleeps unevenly. Some people remain awake because they are drinking. Others work through portions of the night. Bakers may begin labour before dawn. Watchmen patrol. Servants tend fires. Sick people wake their households. Babies continue their ancient campaign against parental rest. You are merely one member of a citywide population of unwilling night owls. Your lantern needs attention. A candle or small flame demands constant respect. Too weak and it becomes useless. Too exposed and wind extinguishes it. Too careless and fire becomes a danger greater than whatever you are trying to illuminate. You shield it with your hand. Light steadies. A moth appears. Of course it does. The creature circles with suicidal determination, apparently convinced that the king's security arrangements have been established for its personal entertainment. You encourage it elsewhere. It ignores you. At least somebody enjoys your lantern. Farther along the wall, you encounter one of the less glamorous difficulties of medieval century work. Your body is tired. This sounds trivial until you must remain awake while nothing happens. You have eaten. Darkness surrounds you. The rhythm of walking becomes repetitive. Your eyelids grow heavier. A battlefield may fill the body with fear. A quiet wall at midnight provides no such assistance. You rub your hands together. Cold helps. So does movement. You count steps for a while, then stop because counting steps somehow makes you sleepier. The dangers of sleeping on watch are obvious enough that military discipline across many periods treats it seriously. A sleeping guard creates a weakness in defences that walls cannot repair. You imagine an officer discovering you curled comfortably beside your post. No, keep walking. The White Tower looms against the sky. In darkness, its enormous walls lose detail, becoming a single, pale mass. You have spent so much time around it that you rarely think of it as frightening. Tonight, briefly, you understand why newcomers might. A bird suddenly launches from somewhere above. Wings beat the air. Your hand moves toward your weapon before your mind identifies the sound. You stare upward. Nothing. Wonderful. Defender of the realm. Conqueror of pigeons. You continue with slightly greater dignity. Stories naturally gather around old fortresses, and the tower has already existed long enough in 1483 to possess memories of executions, imprisonments, political reversals, and deaths. Yet many ghost stories now associated with it belong to later centuries, and some concern people who are still alive during your watch. Anne Boleyn, for example, will not even be born for roughly another generation. So if a headless Tudor queen walks past you tonight, the historical timeline has developed a serious problem. Your actual fears are more practical. Fire, intruders, escape, a gate left unsecured, a drunken quarrel, an unexpected order, a man failing to appear when his watch begins. Those dangers require no supernatural assistance. Near midnight, mist thickens along the Thames. It does not form a perfect theatrical blanket, but moisture softens distances. Sound becomes deceptive. An oar somewhere below seems close enough to touch. Though the boat may be farther away, you peer into darkness. River access is a particular concern. The tower's relationship with the Thames gives it strategic convenience. but convenience works in both directions. Boats can bring authorized people and supplies close to the fortress. That same proximity means waterside approaches require careful supervision. A faint light moves on the river. You watch it. Slowly it passes. No turn toward the tower, no signal, nothing unusual. Your shoulders relax. Later writers sometimes describe medieval night security as though every detail followed one timeless ritual. But practice changes across reigns, emergencies, institutions, and available manpower. Administrative traces can tell us that watches and guards existed without preserving every exchange between tired men beneath a particular moon. Your own midnight remains mostly unwritten. That makes it no less real. Cold has reached your toes now. You flex them inside your footwear. You think of the guardroom fire, then food, then bed, then, unhelpfully, how many hours remain until bed? Do not calculate, never calculate. A bell sounds across London. Its note rolls through darkness. You stop beside the battlement and let it fade for a moment. The entire fortress seems suspended between one sound and the next. The river moves. The mist drifts. Your lantern burns steadily. You breathe slowly. This is the part of guarding nobody paints. No attack. No royal procession, no heroic speech, only patience. You begin another circuit. Eventually another sentry appears ahead. You exchange quiet words, confirm positions, and keep moving. Familiarity is comforting. Each man where he belongs means the system still works. Then, from the courtyard below, a sharper voice breaks the stillness. An order. Another voice answers. A door opens. Light spills briefly across stone. You lean toward the inner side of the wall. Men are moving with purpose, not panic, but purpose. Perhaps an officer is checking the watch. Perhaps new instructions have arrived. Whatever the reason, your sleepy calm disappears. You straighten, tighten your grip, and descend toward the activity. Because darkness may hide an intruder, but it also reveals another danger inside any fortress. A tired man can make mistakes, and when royal security depends upon discipline, mistakes have consequences. The light below leads you into a courtyard where several men are already standing straighter than they were a few minutes ago. That tells you almost everything. An officer is present. Sleepiness has vanished with remarkable efficiency. You descend the final steps and join the others, keeping your expression neutral while instructions are repeated. Nothing catastrophic has happened. Nobody has scaled the walls. No prisoner has escaped. This is simply an inspection. Somehow, that does not make you feel much better. A fortress can survive an uneventful night only when men continue doing tedious things correctly. Gates must remain secured. Watches must be maintained. Weapons must be available. Instructions must pass accurately between shifts. Your officer understands this. He also understands something every supervisor eventually discovers. The moment nobody checks, somebody becomes creative. You stand while your equipment receives a glance. The lantern is functioning. Your weapon is where it belongs. You are awake when approached. An excellent beginning. Another guard receives a sharper question. Where was he supposed to be? A pause follows. Not a promising pause. The man explains that he stepped away only briefly. The officer's expression suggests that the word briefly has failed to improve matters. You look elsewhere. There is an art to being present while someone else is reprimanded. Your face must show neither amusement nor excessive interest, especially amusement. Late medieval military discipline rests heavily upon hierarchy and personal command. Men serving under royal or noble authority are expected to obey officers, remain at assigned duties, protect equipment, and maintain order. Regulations vary according to context, but commanders have plenty of reasons to punish negligence. A royal fortress is not an ordinary workplace. Failure can endanger prisoners, treasure, weapons, royal residence, and political authority. The missing guard is fortunate that nothing happened. That argument does not help him. Nothing happened can mean the defences worked. It can also mean negligence happened to go unpunished by circumstance. The officer sends him away with instructions that promise further consequences. You suspect his next few days will contain less leisure than usual. Punishments available within military and household environments can range from loss of pay and undesirable duties to confinement or more serious penalties for severe offences. The response depends upon what has been done, who has authority, and how dangerous the failure is judged to be. Not every mistake leads to spectacular punishment. Medieval commanders need functioning soldiers, not a permanently terrified collection of men unable to perform basic tasks. Still, some offences are taken very seriously. Desertion, theft, violence against superiors, assisting an escape, treason. Those belong to a different category from arriving late because you spent too long drinking. Although if you arrive late often enough, your superior may begin treating ale as a hostile foreign power. The inspection continues. A gate is checked. Fastenings are examined. Questions pass between officers and sentries. You give short answers. There is no advantage in turning a simple response into a personal memoir. Eventually the officer moves away. Shoulders relax around you. Someone exhales loudly. Another man mutters that the inspection was unnecessary. Nobody agrees loudly enough to be overheard. Your watch resumes. But the little disturbance has awakened you completely, and as you walk, you think about how order is maintained among men who spend so much time armed. Bored, tired, and occasionally drunk, it is not effortless. Arguments happen. One guard insults another. Someone owes money. Someone cheats at dice. Two men both believe a particular bench belongs to them. A joke lands badly. An old grievance suddenly becomes urgent after 3 cups of ale. Put weapons into this environment and officers acquire understandable concerns. Keeping the king's peace within the fortress matters almost as much as defending its walls. The concept of the king's peace has deep roots in English law. Violence is not merely a private disagreement when it disturbs royal order. Courts, sheriffs, constables, household officers, and local officials participate in overlapping systems designed to control wrongdoing. Inside the tower, authority is concentrated. You cannot punch a colleague and then disappear comfortably into another county. Everyone knows where you sleep. That discourages spontaneity. Mostly. You remember an argument from several evenings earlier. It began with dice. Of course it did. A coin was disputed. Voices rose. One man accused another of cheating. The accused man replied with a comment about the first man's intelligence, family, and ability to count. None of these subjects improved the discussion. A stool moved. Then several other men intervened before Steele appeared. The next morning, both participants looked embarrassed. The dice looked innocent. Dice always do. Gambling has troubled English authorities for centuries, especially where it distracts men from archery or military readiness. Edward VI himself issued measures concerning unlawful games, continuing a much older concern that men might prefer dice, bowls, or other amusements to useful martial practice. The government would like you physically prepared to defend the realm. You would occasionally prefer to throw small cubes at a table. Civilization continues somehow. Drink creates similar tension. Ale is ordinary nourishment and sociability. But excessive drinking can damage discipline. An intoxicated sentry is slower, noisier, less observant, and much easier to deceive. He may also become convinced that he sings beautifully. This is rarely true. You reach the next position and exchange information with the man stationed there. Everything is quiet. The reprimanded guard has not returned. You wonder what penalty he will receive. Here the documentary trail becomes frustrating. Financial accounts and surviving regulations can expose systems of payment and command. While legal material reveals punishments in broader military and household contexts, what they seldom provide is a complete disciplinary ledger for every ordinary guard serving every shift in the tower during 1483. Maybe your colleague loses wages, maybe he receives an unpleasant assignment. Maybe the officer simply frightens him enough that he never leaves his post again, all fit the practical needs of discipline. There is another side to obedience that concerns you more. What happens when orders conflict? A soldier's duty sounds straightforward while authority is stable. Obey the king, obey the king's appointed officers, protect the fortress. But England has spent much of your lifetime discovering that identifying the rightful source of authority can become extremely complicated. You may have been a child when Henry VI occupied the throne. Then Edward IV became king. Henry returned briefly. Edward returned again. Men who were rebels under one government became royal servants under another. Loyalty can be rewritten by victory. That lesson sits quietly beneath every order you receive in 1483. Edward there is dead. Edward V is king, at least in title. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, exercises enormous authority as protector. Other powerful figures have their own supporters. If two men carrying impressive seals give different commands, your position becomes uncomfortable very quickly. Later generations may judge choices according to what happens afterward. You cannot. You live before the ending. That may be the most important difference between you and the historian. A modern reader knows Richard III will take the crown. You do not. A modern reader knows the princes will become one of England's enduring mysteries. You do not. Tonight, you know only that orders arrive and sensible men follow recognized authority. For now, a sound interrupts your thoughts. Not danger. Just another guard approaching. He has news from elsewhere in the complex. An officer wants additional men ready in the morning. No reason is given. You exchange a look. There it is again. That tightening sensation. Politics entering ordinary duty without introducing itself. By the time you finally leave the night watch, the eastern sky is beginning to lose its deepest darkness. You are exhausted, but the fortress is already stirring. Rumours are stirring faster. At breakfast, a man speaks quietly about the Woodville family. Another mentions Richard of Gloucester. A third tells him to lower his voice. You sit down. Nobody laughs about dice this time. Edward III's death has opened a struggle over who will control the young Edward III, and control of the boy king means influence over England itself. You tear bread slowly. Names pass around the room. Rivers, Grey, Hastings, Buckingham, Gloucester. Some men claim to know exactly what is happening. That is usually how you know they do not. Outside. Another bell sounds over London. The kingdom has a king. It has a protector. It has powerful families watching one another. And inside the tower, men are beginning to wonder which orders they may soon be asked to obey. The names linger over breakfast long after the voices carrying them have fallen quiet. Gloucester, Woodville, Buckingham, Hastings. Each belongs to a world far above your own, yet this morning they feel strangely close. A few weeks ago, your worries could be reduced to familiar proportions: wages, weather, food, equipment, the temper of an officer, and whether your boots might survive another season. Now every messenger seems capable of carrying the future. Edward V died unexpectedly on 9 April 1483, not yet 41 years old. His eldest surviving son, Edward, Prince of Wales, was only 12. The boy was not in London when his father died. He was at Ludlow, where a household centred upon his maternal relatives, the Woodvilles, had helped supervise his upbringing and administration in the Welsh marches. That distance suddenly mattered. A king could die in one place while his heir remained days of travel away. Messages had to move by horse. People had time to think. More dangerously, they had time to act. You hear several versions before your bowl is empty. In one, everything is proceeding properly. In another, London is moments from armed confrontation. A third account contains so many secret meetings that you wonder whether anyone in England has slept since Easter. The truth arrives only in fragments. Edward Thwaites' widow, Elizabeth Woodville, has powerful relatives. Her brother Anthony Woodville, Earl Rivers, is among those accompanying the young Edward toward London. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the late king's younger brother, has his own position and supporters. Richard had served Edward IV loyally for years, particularly in northern England. Now he is the king's surviving adult brother. He also has reason to worry about how much influence the Woodville family might exercise over his nephew. Whether those fears were sincere, exaggerated, politically convenient, or some mixture of all three remains difficult to untangle. Motives are rarely preserved as neatly as actions. Men explain themselves publicly, enemies explain them differently. And later writers add another layer. You receive none of those layers. You receive gossip. A man leans closer across the table. They met at Northampton, someone corrects him. Stony Stratford. Another voice says both. This, for once, is not entirely contradictory. Richard and Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, met Earl Rivers at Northampton near the end of April. The young Edward continued to Stony Stratford. Richard then arrested Rivers and other members of the king's entourage, including Edward's half-brother Richard Grey. The boy king came under Richard's control. The room grows quieter when that part is mentioned. Arresting men surrounding the king is not a minor administrative adjustment. Richard maintained that he was protecting Edward from harmful influence and alleged plotting. The Woodville side had every reason to view matters differently. You choose slowly. There is an uncomfortable feature of political crises when you occupy a low position. Everyone above you claims to be preserving order. You are the person expected to stand armed while they do it. News spreads across London that the young king is coming. That changes the atmosphere immediately. Preparations increase. Servants hurry. Officers confer. Instructions become more precise. The Tower waits. Yet Edward does not initially come directly here. He enters London on 4th of May and is lodged at the Bishop of London's palace at St. Paul's, before later moving to the Tower in preparation for his coronation. His coronation is expected. That point is important. A king traditionally spends time at the Tower before proceeding through London toward Westminster for the ceremony. Residence here does not automatically mean imprisonment. If someone tells you in early May that Edward V is going to the Tower, you do not necessarily hear sinister music. You hear royal procedure. His coronation is first planned for early May, then postponed to 22nd of June. Postponements invite conversation. Conversation invites theories. The guard room supplies both generously. One man thinks Richard is merely restoring proper government. Another distrusts the Woodvilles. Someone else points out that the boy is king regardless of which uncle or relative gives advice. A fourth man has no opinion because he's attempting to finish his meal without accidentally committing treason. You admire him. Political neutrality becomes a sophisticated art when everyone is listening. Outside, London has its own reaction. The city authorities want stability. Merchants want trade to continue. Property owners prefer streets without armed factions fighting through them. Ordinary families have little appetite for another round of dynastic warfare. Many adults alive in 1483 can remember previous upheavals personally. Towton was fought only 22 years earlier. Barnet and Tewkesbury only 12. Those are not remote historical names to you. Men who fought in those battles still walk the streets. Widows remember husbands who did not return. Families remember estates confiscated and restored as governments changed. So when powerful nobles begin arresting one another around a child king, people notice. Your generation has learned that politics can become physical very quickly. A proclamation or public display can therefore matter enormously. Authority needs to be seen. Royal badges appear. Messages are read publicly. Noble households move with visible retainers. London's leaders meet important arrivals with ceremony. The performance of stability becomes part of stability itself. One peculiar detail of Edward I's entry into London is that Richard carefully presented himself as the young king's loyal protector. Contemporary civic observers did not necessarily behave as though they were watching an obvious usurpation already completed. That hindsight belongs to us, not to you. You see Richard accompanying the king. You see deference shown to Edward. You hear that coins and seals operate in his name. Why assume his uncle will soon take the crown? Yet little disturbances continue. Elizabeth Woodville has taken sanctuary at Westminster with her younger children. Sanctuary is not merely an informal hiding place. Churches and certain religious precincts can provide recognised protection. Although the legal and political limits of sanctuary can become contested, the Queen has chosen Westminster Abbey. That decision speaks loudly without requiring her to make a speech in your guardroom. A queen mother does not gather children and possessions into sanctuary because she feels relaxed. Reports of what she carries with her become increasingly colourful. Later accounts describe household goods being moved into sanctuary in haste, creating an image of crowded rooms filled with chests, servants, children, and anxiety. How much of the dramatic detail belongs to eyewitness memory and how much was sharpened in later retelling is hard to separate. But the essential fact remains: she is there. Her eldest son is under Gloucester's protection, and you are inside the fortress likely to receive that son before his coronation. As May moves toward June, the Tower grows more politically significant. Edward V arrives here around 19 May. At first, his residence can still be understood through the customs surrounding coronation. Preparations continue. Officials conduct business. The young king has attendants. Life does not suddenly become a dungeon story. That gradualness is precisely what makes the situation unsettling. Nothing announces the moment when ordinary royal residence becomes something else. A door closes, a date changes, a visitor stops arriving, an officer receives a new command. Meaning accumulates afterward. Your duties remain almost insultingly normal. Check the gate, carry the message, relieve the watch, inspect the fastening. Stand here, wait. Then another name begins dominating conversation. Hastings. William, Lord Hastings, has been one of Edward IV's closest companions and an important political figure. He is not naturally aligned with the Woodville faction, which might seem to place him comfortably beside Gloucester. Politics refuses to remain that simple. On 13th June, during a council meeting at the Tower, Richard suddenly accuses Hastings of treason. The news reaches ordinary men rapidly. Hastings has been arrested. Then comes the part that changes the mood entirely. He is executed, quickly, within the Tower precinct. There is little time for the elaborate judicial process one might expect for a nobleman of his standing. You do not need to see the event. The reaction is enough. Conversations shrink. People who confidently explained Richard's intentions yesterday become thoughtful today. A powerful lord who served Edward there for years has fallen between breakfast and evening. What does that tell a guard? Mostly this: speak carefully. The exact planning behind Hastings' fall remains one of the difficult knots of the summer. Was Richard reacting to a genuine conspiracy against him? Had he decided earlier that Hastings had become an obstacle, sources close to the events disagree, and later accounts carry their own political baggage. Your world offers no answer, only the result. One chair at council is empty, one household has lost its lord, one more warning has entered the tower, then your officer gives new instructions. Security around the royal lodgings is to remain tight. Edward V is already inside. His younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, remains with their mother in sanctuary, but pressure is growing for the second boy to join his brother. You glance toward the royal apartments. A 12-year-old king waits behind guarded walls while adults argue over the future of his crown. Soon he will no longer be the only royal child there. And when his little brother passes through the tower's gates, the fortress you know will begin acquiring the mystery by which the world remembers it. The younger boy does not arrive through the gate as an ordinary visitor. By now, nothing concerning the royal family feels ordinary. It is June, and the long daylight of an English summer stretches across the tower walls. The stone warms beneath the afternoon sun, birds circle above the battlements, and the Thames flashes whenever light catches the moving water. You could almost mistake it for a peaceful day. Then word reaches your post. Richard, Duke of York, is coming. He's only 9 years old. For weeks he has remained with his mother, Elizabeth Woodville, in sanctuary at Westminster. His older brother Edward is already inside the tower, still publicly regarded as Edward V, and still awaiting the coronation that seems forever to be moving farther away. Now the authorities want the brothers together. Getting Richard out of sanctuary is delicate. Nobody simply marches into Westminster Abbey and drags a royal child into the street. Sanctuary carries religious authority, public significance, and legal tradition. Gloucester's government instead applies pressure through negotiation. The figure placed at the centre of that negotiation is Cardinal Thomas Bourchier, Archbishop of Canterbury. He goes to the Queen. You're nowhere near their conversation. Of course. What reaches you later is the result. Elizabeth agrees to surrender her younger son. Imagine the moment without the grand language of chronicles. A mother has already lost control of her eldest boy. Several of her relatives have been arrested. One of the most powerful men associated with her late husband's court, Lord Hastings, has just been killed. Now important men are asking for another child. Whatever assurances are offered, letting Richard go cannot feel simple. When he finally leaves sanctuary on 16th June, he enters the custody of men acting for the Protector. Soon he is brought to the tower. You stand among those watching movement around the entrance. There are horses, attendants, commands, the usual choreography of rank. Then, somewhere within it, there is a child. That is what strikes you. Not a symbol, not the Duke of York, a boy. He has grown up inside royal households, so ceremony is familiar to him. He understands that people bow. He knows servants appear when called. Fine clothing and formal behaviour are normal parts of his life. Still, he is 9. Perhaps he looks around. Perhaps he asks questions. Perhaps he already understands far more about the danger surrounding his family than the adults would like to believe. No reliable witness has preserved his expression for you, so you do not invent one. You simply watch him pass. The gate closes afterward. 2 brothers are now inside. At first, their presence need not appear sinister. The tower is traditionally associated with preparations for coronation, and Edward's residence here began within that context. Richard joining his brother can be presented as convenient and appropriate. The boys have royal apartments. They are not immediately thrown into chains. They have attendants. Meals arrive. Servants move through their surroundings. Their days may include prayer, conversation, study, recreation, and the familiar routines expected of children raised at court. You see only portions of this, a servant carrying food. a physician or household figure admitted through a controlled entrance, clothing taken somewhere, a door opened and closed. From such tiny observations, gossip constructs entire worlds. One guard claims the boys were laughing earlier, another says Edward has become withdrawn. A servant insists the young king spends long periods at prayer. Someone else has heard he expects his coronation shortly. Which version is true? Possibly several. A 12-year-old can laugh in the morning and be frightened by evening. Children are not symbols with one permanent expression. You pass near the royal lodgings during a later duty. The security feels tighter than it did when noble visitors moved freely through these spaces. There are still servants, but access matters more. Instructions arrive more carefully. Names are checked. You begin noticing who no longer appears. That is harder than noticing arrivals. Absence makes no sound. Edward's planned coronation on 22nd June is approaching, yet instead of final preparations bringing certainty, London is hearing something extraordinary. The legitimacy of Edward IV's marriage is being challenged. The argument centres upon the claim that Edward IV had previously made a binding promise to marry another woman, often identified in later accounts as Lady Eleanor Butler. If such a pre-contract were valid under the church law of the time, his later marriage to Elizabeth Woodville could be considered invalid, making their children illegitimate to you. This sounds like the kind of legal argument that should require several exhausted clerks and an alarming quantity of parchment. Instead, it may determine who wears the crown. On 22nd June, the day Edward V had been expected to be crowned, a sermon is preached at Paul's Cross attacking the legitimacy of Edward V's children and advancing Richard's claim. The coronation does not happen. That fact travels through London with brutal simplicity. No crown, no procession, no boy king moving from Tower to Westminster inside the fortress. Edward remains where he is. You begin understanding the significance of the guards around him differently. A royal residence with security can look remarkably similar to confinement. The difference lies in whether the resident is free to leave. You cannot ask Edward. You're not invited into his confidence. Instead, you see a ball one afternoon. It comes rolling across part of a courtyard or enclosed space where the boys have been permitted some recreation. A servant retrieves it. Such small moments feel strangely powerful. Medieval children play many recognizable games: balls, hoops, tops, imitation battles, chasing games, and other amusements appear across the period. A royal child may possess finer toys than an ordinary London boy, but childhood still contains movement, competition, boredom, and the universal ability to send an object somewhere inconvenient for a few seconds. The tower contains no constitutional crisis, only a misplaced ball. Then the servant carries it back behind the guarded boundary. The crisis returns. By late June, the argument against the prince's legitimacy has moved beyond rumour. An assembly of lords and other prominent men is presented with Richard's claim. Soon a petition offers him the crown. The official justification will later be set down in an act known as Titulus Regius, declaring Edward IV's children illegitimate and presenting Richard as rightful king. Yet even that apparently firm document will acquire an extraordinary afterlife. When Henry VII defeats Richard 2 years later, he orders Titulus Regius repealed and attempts to suppress copies without having its contents publicly rehearsed. One copy survives in a chronicle, ensuring that the argument Henry wanted politically buried remains available centuries later. Paper can be remarkably stubborn. You know none of that future. What you know is that the boy inside the tower is being called king less confidently. His uncle is being discussed more confidently. The change happens in language before it happens in ceremony. Men who once say the king and clearly mean Edward begin pausing. Which king? A dangerous question. On 25th of June, Earl Rivers and Richard Grey, arrested during the seizure of Edward's household, are executed at Pontefract. News reaches London afterward. The circle around the boys has become smaller. The following day, Richard accepts the crown. You hear it through official channels and unofficial mouths almost simultaneously. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, will be Richard III. For a moment. The statement feels awkward simply because your mind has spent years associating kingship with Edward IV. Then training takes over. Authority has a new name. Orders continue. The tower remains guarded. Meals continue entering the prince's lodgings. At this stage, the brothers can still be seen on occasion. Later testimony will describe them as peering within the tower grounds, sometimes shooting and playing. One account associated with the Italian observer Dominic Mancini says that they were eventually seen less frequently, and that Edward devoted himself increasingly to prayer. Mancini was in England during these months, which makes his testimony valuable, but he was not inside every chamber, and depended partly upon information obtained from others. The boys are already becoming difficult to see clearly, even before they disappear. That uncertainty reaches you as routine changes. An area once accessible becomes restricted. A familiar servant is replaced. Visitors become fewer. You stand beside a door longer than usual. Nobody explains why. One evening, as sunlight turns the upper walls golden, you catch distant movement. 2 young figures, perhaps attendants nearby. Then they pass from sight. You do not know whether you have just seen them for the final time. Why would you people disappear around corners every day? The bell rings, a shift changes, somewhere below. A cook shouts for assistance. London continues beyond the walls, and the boys remain inside while preparations begin for another man's coronation. Richard III will soon ride through the city as king. You will stand beneath the same banners, obey the same officers, and guard the same fortress. But every oath and command now carries a question that nobody around you seems eager to say aloud. If Richard is king, what exactly have the 2 boys behind those guarded doors become? The answer does not arrive as a single proclamation. Instead, the tower changes around you. Names change first. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, becomes King Richard III. Edward, whom men had recently addressed as Edward IV, is no longer treated publicly as the rightful king awaiting coronation. A few weeks can rearrange an entire vocabulary. You discover how carefully words must now be chosen. Calling Richard the Protector is suddenly outdated. Calling Edward the King may be considerably worse than outdated. A phrase that sounded perfectly loyal in May can sound suspicious by July. So you listen before speaking. It is an excellent survival habit. Richard formally assumes the crown on 26th June 1483. His coronation follows on 6th July at Westminster Abbey, only 3 months after Edward IV's death. The speed is astonishing when you consider everything that has happened between those dates. A king has died. His heir has travelled toward London. The heir's maternal relatives have been arrested. The Queen has entered sanctuary. Lord Hastings has fallen. The young king's brother has joined him in the Tower. Questions have been raised about the prince's legitimacy. And now their uncle wears the crown, yet your mourning still begins with boots. That may be the strangest part. History can overturn a dynasty without repairing the hole in your shoe. The Tower prepares for royal ceremony with greater intensity. A coronation is not merely a religious service performed inside Westminster Abbey. It is a public statement that kingship has been accepted, blessed, displayed, and placed within tradition. Richard and his queen, Anne Neville, are crowned together. London fills with movement. Nobles arrive dressed according to rank. Horses, servants, cloth, food, religious officials, heralds, musicians, and household officers contribute to the spectacle. For someone working security, spectacle means more people to watch. Your instructions become precise. Stand here. Allow these men through. Keep that route clear. Expect this official. Do not leave until relieved. You obey. There is comfort in exact orders. They require no opinion. A group of richly dressed men passes, and for a moment you catch the flash of cloth of gold. Sunlight strikes metal fittings. Voices overlap. Somewhere a horse snorts impatiently. The monarchy knows how to look permanent. That is part of its power. Richard's coronation is elaborate enough to project confidence, and many prominent figures participate. Nothing about the ceremony announces a ruler expecting his reign to last only a little more than 2 years. Of course, nobody knows the length of a reign at its beginning. Every king is crowned toward an unknown future. You watch the preparations and wonder what ordinary Londoners think. Some probably accept Richard's claim. His supporters argue that Edward III's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid, and that their children therefore cannot inherit. Others may find the entire sequence suspicious. Many probably care less about legal arguments than whether peace continues and food remains affordable. People can hold several concerns simultaneously. A merchant may wonder whether Richard is rightful king while also wondering whether a customer intends to pay an overdue bill. After the ceremony, Richard's authority becomes visible everywhere. Documents carry his regnal name. Officers act in his service. Coins will bear his image and titles. Prayers acknowledge him. Royal commands are now his commands for you. The practical conclusion is unavoidable. You serve the king's fortress. Richard is the king recognized by the government controlling it. You follow the chain of command. That does not require affection. It requires employment. One afternoon you encounter a herald. Even before he speaks, his clothing makes his function unmistakable. Heralds occupy a curious position in medieval political culture, associated with proclamations, ceremony, genealogy, tournaments, and the language of coats of arms. Colour and symbol become official speech. Richard's personal emblem, the white boar, appears increasingly around the royal household and among supporters. The creature is memorable. A white boar does not exactly whisper modestly from a badge. Men wearing it proclaim allegiance without saying a word. You begin seeing the device often enough that your eyes stop lingering on it. Political imagery becomes ordinary remarkably quickly. Yesterday's new symbol becomes tomorrow's background decoration. There is even wordplay available to anyone brave or foolish enough to make it. The Latin word aper means boar, and later, hostile traditions enjoy twisting Richard's badge and reputation into insults. You do not participate. Mocking the reigning king's animal emblem while standing inside his fortress seems an unnecessary experiment. The royal household itself shifts. Appointments follow the new regime. Men trusted by Richard gain responsibility. Others withdraw, lose influence, or become objects of suspicion. Sir Robert Brackenbury will become Constable of the Tower later in the summer, a position carrying considerable responsibility for the fortress. Names like his begin to matter to you because political changes above eventually become practical instructions below. This is how a regime reaches an ordinary guard, not through philosophical discussion, through supervisors. The question of how widely Richard's accession was genuinely accepted in these first weeks cannot be answered simply by counting who attended ceremonies. Public participation may indicate support, obligation, caution, or some mixture. Men who bow today may rebel later. Others who dislike the new king may still serve him faithfully because political order seems preferable to renewed war. Silence can mean agreement. It can also mean self-preservation. You become fluent in silence. Inside the tower, the two princes remain. Their uncle's coronation has transformed their status without moving them physically. Edward is no longer officially king. Richard of York is no longer simply the younger brother of a reigning monarch. They are children declared illegitimate by the new political settlement. But illegitimate does not mean irrelevant. Their blood remains dangerous. Anyone who rejects Richard's title can still see Edward as Edward was rightful heir. That possibility gives the boys political significance no locked door can remove. You notice their visibility decreasing. At first, people had reported seeing them in gardens or at windows. Now such sightings become less common. Access tightens. Perhaps this is ordinary security around politically sensitive royal children. Perhaps something darker is developing. You cannot know. Your instructions contain no explanation. A door is guarded because you are told to guard it. You pass one evening carrying a lantern. The corridor is quiet. Behind a closed door, you think you hear movement. A voice. Perhaps. Then another. Young voices. The stone distorts sound. You keep walking. Later, in the guard room, someone asks whether you have seen the princes recently. You say no. Another man has not either. A third claims his cousin knows a servant who saw them only yesterday. Nobody can confirm it. This is how uncertainty grows. Not with thunder. With missing glimpses. Richard, meanwhile, begins governing. He leaves London after his coronation and undertakes a royal progress through the kingdom. Such journeys allow a monarch to display authority, meet subjects, reward supporters, receive petitions, and build relationships beyond the capital. His progress takes him through places including Oxford, Gloucester, Worcester, Warwick, Coventry, Leicester, Nottingham, York, and other centres. At York, his son Edward of Middleham is invested as Prince of Wales in September. From a royal perspective, the message is clear. Richard has a queen. Richard has an heir. Richard has a government. The future is being arranged. Yet behind the walls you guard. Edward IV's sons remain an unresolved presence. Rumours begin moving outside. People ask where they are. Why are they no longer appearing? Are they ill? Have they been moved? Is Edward still praying? Is Richard of York with him? Nobody at your level possesses an answer strong enough to stop the questions. Even chronicles written close to the period fail to provide a clean window into these weeks. Different accounts place emphasis in different places, and some of the most detailed narratives are written after Richard has already been defeated. When political incentives have changed dramatically, certainty becomes difficult precisely where everyone wants it most. For you, there is only the fortress, a key, a corridor, a changed instruction, an empty window. One night you stand outside beneath a clear sky. London stretches beyond the walls, quieter now. You can see faint points of fire behind you. The White Tower rises pale in the moonlight. Richard is king. That fact is settled for the moment. But the fate of the boys is not. Soon summer will begin sliding toward autumn. Their appearances will diminish until even rumour struggles to place them. And you will discover that guarding something you cannot see is far more unsettling than watching any gate. Summer does not end suddenly. The evenings simply begin arriving earlier. At first you notice it because the lanterns are needed sooner. Then because the stone seems to hold less warmth after sunset. Mist gathers more easily over the Thames, and the bright afternoons that once stretched lazily across the battlements begin shortening toward autumn. Something else has faded with them. You have not seen the princes. At first, this means very little. You're one guard in a large fortress. You do not have access to every chamber or every movement within the royal lodgings. A day can pass without seeing someone who remains perfectly healthy behind another wall. Then several days pass, then more. You begin hearing the same observation from other men. Nobody says it loudly. Have you seen them? a shake of the head. When? Another pause. The question moves through the tower more quietly than earlier political gossip. There had been endless conversation when Edward IV died. Men debated Gloucester, the Woodvilles, Hastings, Sanctuary, coronations, and legitimacy with the confidence of people who possessed approximately 1/4 of the necessary information. This feels different. There are children involved, and silence has entered the story. Reports from the summer suggest that Edward and Richard were seen less and less as Richard III's reign became established. Dominic Mancini, the Italian visitor whose account provides one of the closest surviving narratives to these events, wrote that the boys withdrew into the inner apartments and eventually ceased appearing altogether. Mancini left England before the end of 1483. He did not tell the world what happened to them. Nobody reliably does. That absence will become one of the most famous silences in English history. For you, it is not famous. It is uncomfortable. You continue receiving ordinary assignments. A delivery enters. A prisoner requires supervision. A noble visitor passes through. Weapons are checked. The watches change. Every task seems almost offensively normal. You find yourself looking toward the royal apartments whenever duty brings you nearby. A window is empty. A doorway remains controlled. Servants move, but you cannot tell which household they serve. Perhaps the boys have simply been moved somewhere more private. That possibility circulates. Another rumour says they are ill. Someone claims Edward has been unwell for some time. Another insists they have left the tower secret. A third whispers something darker and is immediately told to stop. You do not ask him to repeat it. Words can become evidence against the speaker. There is still no announcement of death. No public funeral, no body displayed, no official explanation declaring that the sons of Edward IV have died. They simply stop appearing in accounts where people expect to find them. That distinction matters, centuries later. The question will often be phrased as though everyone knows the boys were murdered in a particular room on a particular night. You possess no such knowledge. Neither does history. The familiar image of two children smothered in bed owes much of its enduring power to accounts written after Richard's reign and, eventually, to Shakespeare's dramatic imagination. Shakespeare has not been born yet. Neither has the Tudor dynasty properly begun. Your uncertainty is cleaner than theirs. You simply do not know. Still, rumours of death begin circulating during Richard's reign. Some sources indicate that people came to believe the princes had been killed, and accusations against Richard eventually became politically powerful. But belief is not proof. If the boys are dead, who gives the order? Who carries it out? Where? When? Why is there no surviving command? Why are their remains not publicly identified? Each question opens another. Richard is the obvious suspect because he benefits from removing rival claimants and controls the government under which they disappear. That is a serious argument. It is not the only one ever proposed. Later writers accused Sir James Tyrrell of organising the killing on Richard's instructions. Thomas More, writing decades afterward, provides the famous detailed narrative in which Miles Forrest and John Dighton suffocate the princes with bedding. More's account becomes enormously influential. Yet he was a child in 1483 and wrote his history many years later. His narrative may preserve genuine information circulating among people connected to the events. It may also contain details that cannot now be independently verified. You would find the confidence of future storytellers fascinating. They know exactly what happened in rooms you are currently guarding without knowing yourself. Perhaps you should leave them a note. Unfortunately, parchment is expensive. Another possibility eventually attracts suspicion toward Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham. Buckingham had helped Richard seize political control earlier in the year and had supported his accession. If he possessed access, motive, or independent ambitions, could he have acted again? Possibility is not evidence. Then there is Henry Tudor, the future Henry VII, whose supporters will overthrow Richard in 1485. Could the princes have survived long enough for someone connected with the later Tudor cause to become responsible? The chronology makes many versions of that theory difficult, and there is no convincing evidence placing Henry in control of their fate while Richard holds the tower. But once a mystery survives long enough, suspects multiply. Your fellow guards would probably be astonished to discover how many people centuries later will be accused of actions that leave almost no contemporary trace. The tower itself begins accumulating stories. A servant heard crying, a guard saw movement at night, someone carried a bundle, a grave was dug. These are exactly the kinds of details human beings attach to unexplained disappearance. The trouble is separating memory from invention. You know how rumours behave. You have watched them mutate across a single breakfast table. Imagine what 500 years can do one afternoon. Rain begins. It taps softly against timber and darkens the stone. You're posted near a passage when a servant approaches carrying linens. Nothing unusual. You recognize him. He passes after the appropriate exchange. For some reason, the bundle catches your attention. White cloth, folded, completely ordinary. Your imagination supplies meaning because uncertainty dislikes emptiness. You feel foolish. This is what tension does. A closed chest becomes suspicious. A whispered conversation becomes conspiracy. A servant carrying bedding becomes part of a story that may exist only inside your tired head. You return your attention to the corridor. Rain continues. Later, you hear a peculiar old belief discussed by one of the men concerning ravens around the tower. Modern visitors will eventually encounter a famous legend claiming that the kingdom will fall if the tower's ravens ever leave. You, however, would not recognize the fully developed legend in its modern form. Evidence for the formal tradition of maintaining ravens at the tower appears much later. Birds may certainly perch around the fortress. They are birds. Fortresses provide excellent perching opportunities, but no nervous official in 1483 is necessarily counting 6 ravens every morning to make sure England continues existing. You might appreciate the simplicity if he were. 1 missing raven is easier to investigate than 2 missing princes. By September, Richard is far from London on his royal progress. His government operates. His son has been named Prince of Wales. The regime appears to be building permanence. Yet stories concerning Edward IV's sons spread. Their absence has become politically dangerous if they are alive. They remain potential focuses for opposition if they are dead. Whoever killed them has created martyrs if nobody can prove either condition. Rumour occupies the space between, and rumour is difficult to imprison. October brings open rebellion. Plots form among men who had previously accepted or served Richard. Buckingham himself turns against the king. In southern England, uprisings are planned, while Henry Tudor, living abroad in Brittany, becomes increasingly important to the opposition. Some rebels appear to rally around the idea that Henry should marry Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's eldest daughter. Notice what this implies. If the princes are presumed dead, Elizabeth becomes central to the Yorkist claim available to Richard's opponents. The disappearance of 2 boys begins reshaping political strategy. Inside the tower, you hear pieces. Buckingham has rebelled. Men are being summoned. Orders travel quickly. The weather is terrible. Heavy rain causes flooding and disrupts movements during the rebellion. Buckingham's forces disintegrate, and he is eventually captured. Of November, he's executed at Salisbury, another great lord gone. You think back to Hastings, then Rivers, then Grey. The year seems to consume important men at remarkable speed. You're still here. Perhaps being overlooked has advantages. By late autumn, the nights are longer. You walk another familiar corridor with a lantern. Your flame bends gently behind its covering. You pass the place where you once thought you heard young voices. Nothing comes from behind the door now. Perhaps nobody is there. Perhaps someone is sleeping. Perhaps the room has been reassigned. You have no permission to enter, so you keep walking. That is the final cruelty of being a guard near a historical mystery. You protect doors without knowing what lies behind every one. You follow orders without receiving their reasons. You witness changes without knowing which change matters, and when the princes vanish from sight. Your own life does not pause to solve the question. Winter is coming, Richard remains king. Enemies are gathering abroad. Families throughout England are deciding where their loyalties belong. You tighten your cloak around yourself and continue along the cold stone. The question is no longer merely what happened to the boys, for a man in your position. Another question has become much more immediate. How do you survive what happens next? Survival begins with learning when not to have an opinion. By the closing months of 1483, this skill may be worth more to you than swordsmanship. You have watched powerful men rise, disappear, and die within a single season. You have heard Edward V called king, then heard his title stripped away. You have watched Richard of Gloucester become Richard III. You have seen badges change, officers change, instructions change, and conversations become quieter whenever unfamiliar footsteps approach. So you adapt. At breakfast, when another guard announces that Buckingham was a fool, you concentrate intensely on your bread. When someone asks whether Richard can hold the kingdom, you answer that the weather looks poor. When a third man begins discussing Henry Tudor, you discover an urgent need to inspect your cup. You're becoming extraordinarily knowledgeable about cups. This is not cowardice, it is practical intelligence. Loyalty in late medieval England is personal, political, local, and economic all at once. You owe service to officers. You may depend upon a patron. Your family may live on land controlled by another lord. Friends and relatives can belong to different networks of allegiance. Then the crown sits above everything. Ideally, these loyalties align. In 1483 they do not always cooperate. Richard III has defeated Buckingham's rebellion. But defeating rebels does not erase the reasons people rebelled. Some former supporters have fled, others have been arrested, estates can be confiscated and redistributed. Rewards follow loyalty. Consequences follow failure. You begin noticing new faces around positions of authority. A man's absence may mean he has been reassigned. It may mean he has gone home. It may mean something considerably less comfortable. You rarely ask. Your family occupies your thoughts more often now. If you have a wife and children elsewhere in London, they depend partly upon your income if relatives live outside the city. News from them may arrive irregularly. Political instability is not an abstract contest when your wages purchase somebody else's bread. Suppose your patron rebels. Do you follow him? Suppose the king commands you against a man whose household found you employment. Which loyalty wins? The answer looks obvious from a safe distance. It feels different when both sides carry weapons. The 15th century has already taught English families how quickly political identity can become dangerous. After battles, victorious kings reward supporters and punish opponents. Although reconciliation also occurs because no ruler can govern indefinitely by destroying everyone who once chose badly. Edward the Thaw himself had learned to combine severity with pragmatism. Richard must do the same. Men who participated in unrest are not all treated identically. Some lose property, some flee abroad, some eventually recover favour. Political punishment is selective because government requires functioning local elites. That gives you hope. Being useful is safer than being famous. You have no castle of your own, no private army, no claim to the throne. Nobody is composing genealogies to prove that your grandmother gives you a superior right to England. For once, mediocrity feels luxurious. Still, the possibility of military service remains. A royal fortress must be ready for disturbances. Weapons stored within the tower are not ceremonial decoration. Men can be summoned. Retainers can be mobilized. London itself is too important to leave unprotected. You keep equipment ready. The same bill that felt inconvenient during peaceful gate duty now carries another meaning. If rebellion reaches the city, you may have to use it. There is no guarantee you will fight strangers. Civil conflict has a nasty habit of placing familiar accents on both sides. The phrase later generations use, Wars of the Roses, makes the struggle sound almost decorative. Roses suggest gardens, summer afternoons, perhaps someone becoming unnecessarily competitive about pruning. Your experience contains little gardening. Lancaster and York are dynastic labels attached to shifting alliances rather than two permanent teams wearing perfectly standardized colors. Men change allegiance, families divide, political circumstances alter. Even the famous red rose against white rose image becomes much neater in later memory than contemporary politics ever was. You would probably be confused by a modern souvenir shop. Which rose did you support? Whichever one was not arresting me. A surprisingly sensible answer. Your own loyalties may contain genuine feeling. Edward IV ruled for most of your adult life. Perhaps you admired him. Perhaps you remember celebrations after victories. Perhaps your employer benefited from his reign. Richard had been Edward's loyal brother for years. That makes the events of 1483 harder to understand, not easier. Was Richard protecting himself from hostile Woodville influence, and later convinced that Edward's children were legally barred from succession? Did he always intend to take the crown? Did his ambitions grow as opportunity appeared? Actions survive more clearly than private thoughts. No document opens Richard's mind and allows you to inspect the exact moment intention became decision. So even if someone in the guardroom demands certainty, you cannot provide it. You barely possess certainty about tomorrow's duty roster outside the fortress. Autumn deepens, rain turns roads difficult, mud clings to boots, travel slows. The Thames remains busy, though cold weather changes the experience of anyone working upon it. Your fingers stiffen during exposed watches. Clothing becomes defense. Wool is precious. A cloak that seemed heavy in summer becomes your closest political ally by November. You pull it tighter at night. Smoke settles over London differently. Fires burn longer. Houses close themselves against cold. The smell of fuel hangs in passages and courtyards. Inside the guardroom, men cluster near a warmth. This produces another ancient political struggle. Who gets the best place by the fire rank helps. Speed helps. Being large helps. Arriving first helps most. You return from duty one evening to find your preferred place occupied by a man who has clearly decided never to move again. You consider the options. Rebellion has recently failed badly for Buckingham. You decide against rebellion. A stool farther away will do. Conversation turns toward Christmas. That is comforting. The religious calendar continues despite dynastic uncertainty. Advent approaches, followed by the Christmas season with worship, feasting, social obligations, and whatever celebrations different households can afford, even inside a fortress. People anticipate better food. Someone speculates about what might be served. Another insists there will be extra ale. A third claims he knows exactly what the royal household is planning. Nobody believes him. For a few minutes, politics retreats. You discuss meat. This may be the healthiest conversation you have had all year. Then Henry Tudor's name returns. He remains abroad. Having attempted to participate in the October Rising, his expedition failed to establish him in England. But the rebellion has pushed him into greater prominence. on Christmas Day 1483 at Rennes in Brittany. Henry will publicly pledge to marry Elizabeth of York if he gains the throne. The promise is politically powerful. It offers a future union between his Lancastrian claim and the Yorkist line represented by Edward III's eldest daughter. You do not hear the vow as it happens. It occurs across the Channel. But ideas travel. So do exiles. Richard's enemies are gathering around Henry. The year that began with Edward there securely on the throne will end with Richard wearing the crown, Edward's sons absent from public view, Elizabeth Woodville still negotiating survival, Buckingham dead, and Henry Tudor emerging as a rival. 9 months, that is all. You think about this during another watch, above you. The winter sky is clear enough for stars. The constellations look exactly as they did before Edward of Law died. There is something calming in that. Kings change. Stars remain indifferent. Your hands rest on cold wood. A fellow guard approaches, and you exchange the necessary words. He tells you that nothing unusual has happened. You almost laugh. Nothing unusual. Perhaps that phrase has acquired a different standard this year. You take his position. The courtyard settles. A door closes somewhere below. For the first time in hours. Nobody asks you to choose anything. You simply stand. That may be the secret to surviving 1483. Not brilliance. Not prophecy. You cannot predict Bosworth. You cannot know which dynasty will rule 2 years from now. You cannot solve the disappearance of the princes or read Richard's private intentions. You can only perform the duty in front of you. Keep the gate, remember the order, care for your equipment. Do not repeat dangerous gossip. Help the men you trust. Send money home when you can. Avoid gambling away your wages. Stay awake. Stay useful. Stay alive. The year moves toward its end one ordinary night at a time. And eventually, after everything you have watched, another darkness begins thinning above the Thames. Your final watch is approaching dawn. The first sign of morning is not light, it is a bird, somewhere beyond the wall. A single call breaks the stillness. Another answers from farther along the river, and then the darkness settles again as if reconsidering whether dawn is really worth the effort. You remain at your post. Cold has worked its way through your shoes. Your shoulders ache beneath the weight of clothing and equipment. The wooden shaft beneath your hand has become so familiar that your fingers settle naturally into the places worn smooth by repeated use. Nothing is happening. After the year you have experienced, nothing feels almost luxurious. The tower around you remains mostly dark. A few lamps burn behind protected openings. High above, the outline of the White Tower separates gradually from the sky. The Thames is still difficult to see. You hear it instead. Water moves against the river bank with a patient rhythm. An oar dips somewhere downstream. The boat itself remains hidden, but the small splash repeats, grows faint, and disappears. Soon the river will fill again. Food will arrive. Messages will arrive. Officials will arrive. Someone will undoubtedly arrive without the permission he believes he has. You almost miss him already. The eastern sky turns from black to charcoal, then grey. Your watch partner walks toward you, rubbing his hands against the cold. Quiet. You nod. Quiet. No escaped prisoners. No fires. No suspicious boats. No drunken guards attempting to negotiate with gates. An excellent night. Together you make part of the final circuit. The fortress emerges piece by piece. A roofline becomes visible, then a tower, then the pale surface of a wall. Places that seemed threatening in darkness become ordinary again. The corner where you imagined movement contains nothing more sinister than a barrel and some stacked timber. You look at it with mild resentment. For several minutes last night, that barrel was clearly plotting against the crown. Morning has exposed it. You descend a staircase carefully. Your knees remind you that stone steps were designed before anyone considered workplace comfort. Below, servants are beginning their day. A door opens, smoke appears from a chimney. Somebody carries water. Somebody else crosses a courtyard so quickly that you suspect he has overslept. The fortress does not wake with ceremony. It accumulates movement. This is how it has functioned through generations. The tower began as a Norman royal stronghold and expanded into a complex containing residences, defences, administrative spaces, storage, worship, and confinement in your lifetime. Those roles overlap so completely that separating them would seem artificial. You have spent your day moving among all of them. You guarded a gate beneath royal authority. You walked walls built by kings dead for centuries. You passed chambers where servants maintained a household. You stood near prisoners who could not follow you outside. You watched London from the battlements. You carried weapons that spent most of their time doing nothing, and you listened. More than anything, you listened. That may be the most realistic part of your life here. A guard waits for information. Footsteps, orders, passwords, bells, rumours, the click of a lock, the sound of something moving where nothing should move. History, when heard from your position, rarely sounds like trumpets. Mostly, it sounds like doors. You reach the courtyard. A raven or crow lands somewhere above and announces its opinion of the morning. You glance upward. The bird receives no official inspection. Nobody counts its companions to determine whether England will survive the day. That famous tower tradition belongs to a much later layer of storytelling. The bird itself appears unconcerned by chronology. It hops along the stone. You continue. The guardroom offers warmth. Men finishing the night shift enter with the slow movements of people who have been awake too long. Men beginning the morning shift look irritatingly functional. A bowl waits. Bread. Ale. Possibly something warm if fortune favours you. You sit. For once. Nobody begins immediately with politics. A man complains about the cold. Another complains about his boots. A third has apparently slept badly because someone snored. The accused snorer denies everything. He was asleep at the time and therefore considers himself the least reliable witness. You smile. There it is. Ordinary life. Kings have changed. Princes have disappeared from view. Noblemen have been executed. Rebellion has risen and failed, and a rival claimant waits across the sea. Yet somebody still snores. It is difficult for political drama to compete with human routine indefinitely. You eat slowly. Richard III remains king as 1483 closes. He will survive the following year, face further political challenges, and eventually meet Henry Tudor at Bosworth in August 1485. You cannot see that battlefield from here, for you. Richard's reign is not a doom chapter with an ending already printed beneath it. It is the present. That difference is worth holding for a moment. When people look backward, events seem to form roads. One decision leads to another. A crown changes hands. A rebellion points toward a battle. A disappearance becomes a mystery. From inside time, there are no roads, only crossroads. You never know which path becomes important until you have already walked past it. Even the princes remain beyond certainty. Were Edward and Richard killed during Richard III's reign? That conclusion has persuaded many people because their disappearance occurs while Richard controls the kingdom, and because their continued existence threatens his title. But persuasion is not the same as a recovered scene. No authenticated order for their deaths has appeared. No contemporary eyewitness gives a secure account of their killing. No remains have been conclusively identified as theirs. In 1674, workers modifying the White Tower will discover the bones of 2 children beneath a staircase. Charles II will order them placed in Westminster Abbey, because they are believed to be the missing princes. Centuries later, examinations will not settle the identification. Those bones will become another question rather than an answer. You know nothing of them. You simply finish your bread. Perhaps that is appropriate. Your life is not built around solving mysteries for future generations. You need to report for another duty tomorrow. Your clothing needs mending. Your wages matter. Someone at home may be waiting for you. If you have children, they will care much more about whether you return safely than whether you understand the constitutional arguments surrounding Titulus Regius. You stand and stretch, outside. Morning has fully arrived. London is visible beyond the walls now. Smoke rises from houses. Boats move along the Thames. Church bells begin carrying over the rooftops. Markets will open. Workshops will fill. Apprentices will run errands. Merchants will calculate. Cooks will prepare meals. Officials will produce documents that future historians will be extremely grateful somebody forgot to throw away. You return your equipment according to routine. Metal touches wood. A fastening is checked. The lantern from your night watch is no longer needed. Its flame is extinguished. That small act feels final. You step outside again before leaving your duty. Sunlight reaches the upper walls. The fortress that seemed almost supernatural at midnight now looks solid, practical, imperfect. Stone, timber, iron, people. That is what the tower is, not yet the museum that future visitors will know. Not merely a prison, not merely a palace, not merely the setting for stories about kings and death. It is a workplace, your workplace, and you have survived another watch. The records may never preserve your name. That is not failure. Most people who inhabited the past disappeared from written history almost completely. Their meals went unrecorded, their jokes vanished. Their aching feet received no chronicles. Nobody painted their portraits or preserved the exact words they whispered beside a fire. Yet kingdoms depended upon them. Walls required masons. Armies required ordinary soldiers. Royal households required servants. Markets required workers. Ships required crews. And fortresses required men willing to remain awake while everyone else slept. You were one of them. Now your shift is over. You walk away from the post as another guard takes your place. The keys remain. The walls remain. The river keeps moving, and you can finally rest. The sounds of the tower begin to soften now, not because the fortress has become quiet, but because you no longer need to listen for every one of them. Let the footsteps fade behind you. Let the gates remain in someone else's care. You have carried the weight of the night long enough. The cold stone beneath your feet gives way, in your imagination, to somewhere warmer and softer. The heavy belt can be loosened. The weapon can be set aside. Your shoulders no longer need to remain straight beneath the gaze of an officer. Outside, London continues without asking anything from you. The Thames moves gently beneath the pale morning sky, carrying boats toward places you do not need to follow. Bells drift across the rooftops, each note becoming softer than the last. Richard can keep his crown for now. The nobles can whisper. The clerks can argue over inheritance and legitimacy. The unanswered questions of the princes can remain behind those thick walls until another day. None of them requires your attention tonight. You have checked the doors. You have walked the battlements. You have watched the lantern flame tremble in the river wind. Everything that belongs to the watch can stay at the tower, and as the fortress grows smaller behind you, imagine the old stone losing its sharp edges in the morning mist. One tower fades, then another. The river becomes only a quiet silver line. Your footsteps slow. Your breathing slows with them. There is nowhere else you need to stand. No password you need to remember. No approaching horseman waiting to be questioned. Only warmth now. Only stillness, and somewhere far behind you, beyond the mist and the centuries. Another guard takes his place beside the gate. So let the year 1483 drift gently away. Let the bells grow distant. Let the river carry the last unanswered questions into the soft grey morning, and rest. Sweet dreams.